Hello and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we explore the myths and stories of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Luke DeWolf.
And I'm Dan Larrabee.
This is episode 5 of the Northern Myths podcast, continuing our series on the Poetic Edda. Today, we are reading Vafthrudnismal. In this episode, we hear the story of when Odin went to the hall of the wise giant Vafthrudnir. He is challenged to a battle of wits, with the loser losing his head. Who will come out alive? Dan, would you like to hear more?
Yes, I would.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Not bad. You want to tell us a little bit about this poem?
For sure. So, the first thing I'm going to mention is that it's going to seem very familiar to anyone who is familiar with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I think Tolkien basically, I don't want to say ripped off, was heavily inspired for his chapter in The Hobbit of Riddles in the Dark, where Bilbo, right? Yeah, Bilbo and Gollum are, telling each other riddles, and whoever loses, I think if Bilbo loses, he's going to get eaten, and if Gollum loses, well, he doesn't get the ring back. So that's what you're in for, is that Odin and Vafthrudnir trading riddles and, trying to see who's the most wise about the ways of the world. In terms of the poem itself, it appears in both the Codex Regius and in the manuscript AM 740 and I think I4TO. There's actually an interesting way to read this, and I don't remember how to talk about the various numbering and naming of manuscripts. It's something I'll have to look into again. Because previous life I did Bible study, and I knew about how to read manuscript notation like that.
Interesting.
But it's interesting, and it was cool to see it and remember that I used to know how to do that. But something to do later on. And it, other than that, it's sort of it's kind of a neat story with Odin, and really emphasizes his love of wisdom and knowledge and desire to know everything that he can know.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to point out, I like the fact that this poem is attested in more than one manuscript.
For sure.
Many of the stories and poems in the Poetic Edda are only in the Codex Regius, and that's a real shame, honestly.
Definitely. And it's interesting, too, because you can find other instances of like riddles and Odin going together. I know, like, you can find like clickbait online about, can you answer the riddles of Odin? And they're some sort of old riddles, like the riddle of the Sphinx. They use that. So it's Odin and riddles go together very, like PB&J, or absolutely. Peanut butter and jam, for those of you who don't know.
Or jelly.
Or jelly, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's sort of this is kind of like iconic Odin.
Exactly, and really, we're going to see that it exemplifies Odin's seeking of knowledge ever more. I mean, right off the bat, we will. So, I think we can pretty much dive right into it, honestly.
For sure. However, we would be remiss if we didn't mention we're using the Poetic Edda, translated and edited by Jackson Crawford, who is he's done a great job with it. He's a professor of Old Norse at
University of Colorado Boulder.
That's right. Yes,
that dust jacket in the book is out of date. Actually, he was at either UCLA or Berkeley or something like that when it came out, and he's at University of Colorado Boulder now. So,
and we'll have a link to the book for Amazon and a link to his YouTube page, because he's got amazing videos on translations and that kind of thing that will definitely help your understanding of all the myths and stories that we work on. So
yeah, lots of good basic info on Norse mythology in general, honestly. So really good channel. Highly recommend it. So Okay, without further ado here, though, I think we're going to get going. And a quick note here. Dr. Crawford has translated the name Vafthrudnir to Riddle Weaver. So when we're reading the poem, we'll say Riddle Weaver. But I've always thought of Vafthrudnir as a proper name for the last who knows how long I've been interested in this stuff. So I will probably say the word Vafthrudnir referring to Riddle Weaver. So,
and I'll mention too, with that, Odin is traveling in this, one of the many stories where he's traveling, so he goes by a different name other than Odin. In the book, it's Odin, but it's I'm probably going to say this wrong, so Luke, feel free to correct it. Gagnarod, meaning good advisor, and you'll see that you'll see Riddle Weaver, call him good advisor when he's addressing him. So, but we just wanted to make sure that if you're reading it in other translations, sometimes they'll just use the Old Norse name.
For names in particular, yeah. I don't have what Gaganrad or whatnot. That's not in my head nearly as much as Vafthrudnir, so I probably won't switch between them. But anyway, I think that's enough intro here again. So here we go, into the poem. Odin said, "Advise me now, Frigg. I want to travel and visit Riddle Weaver. I want to have a contest about old lore with that wise giant." Dan, what does that mean?
Well, the first thing that I want to point out, because I love it, is you have the Allfather, the leader of the Aesir, the god of war and death and beauty and all this huge stuff. And he is still talking to his wife about whether or not this is a good idea. And I think this cannot be overlooked, because first of all, it's just good advice to, talk to your wife, because, she probably has your best interest at heart, and ideally. And I know for me, sometimes I'll get some crazy ideas in my head, and she'll, talk me down and make sure I'm not. Your wife is basically, and I would say husband too, but your partner is basically a sounding board to make sure that you're not crazy and that your ideas isn't stupid. And this is exactly what he's doing. He's like, here's what I want to do. I want to go traveling and have a contest with this old giant who's very versed in old lore, and he wants to test his mettle. He wants to go out and test himself. And I think that's an important point to make as well, is that not much of it is made. It's just because I think there's an expectation that in life you go out and you test yourself. And there's no way to sort of figure out where you are in society, in the dominance hierarchy, where you are just for yourself if you don't go out and test yourself. And I mean, usually it's quite humbling, and you're kind of like, oh, I'm not nearly as good as I thought I was. But then you get to better yourself, which is a gift in itself. So that's sort of what I got from this very first verse.
Yeah, this is fantastic for packing a lot into one stanza, honestly. And I mean, you touched on, I think, the first couple of things that I was looking at here. So first of all, he's talking about a contest of lore. In the Larrington translation, the other one that we reference sometimes, another good translation, Caroline Larrington, the wording is contend in ancient matters. So again, it's just they are seeing who knows more or is the wisest. And those two terms, I think we mentioned before, that they're a bit different in their meaning than what we would understand them to be now. Wisdom is not only factual knowledge and the ability to interpret it, but also understanding of things that you can't know, like prophecy and whatnot. So it's a very broad definition of a word, and it encompasses what we, I think, today have split out into the words knowledge and wisdom separately. So just a little bit about that. But the idea of going and to have a contest of lore, I mean that's just fantastic. It's a great example of basically challenging someone so that you both expand your competency. Like you're testing your competency and looking to expand on it as well. I mean, that's what, to borrow another reference from Dr. Jordan Peterson, who we talk about often on this podcast, kids skateboarding are trying to become competent in something and show, as you mentioned, sort of their status in the hierarchy and climb up and show that they deserve to be a part of whatever little group they've gotten themselves into, right? So this is it, except for, knowledge and wisdom, which is, I think, regarded... I think we've seen in a pattern already, if you've listened to our other podcasts so far, that knowledge and wisdom is at least valued more highly than anything else by Odin in particular.
For sure.
So that's just something to make note of. And then, I mean, you get to, this is Odin, the All-Father, the creator of the world by the stories that we have available to us. And he is going out to essentially train his wisdom with the mightiest person he can find. Like looking for the wise or the all-wise giant. So we've touched on the concept of known and the unknown, explored territory and unexplored territory. And the symbolism that shows up repeatedly here in the Poetic Edda so far is that the giants are a shorthand, essentially, for unexplored territory and the unknown and chaos in general. And so, effectively, to me, what going out and finding, the wisest or the mightiest giant he can is that he's finding the wisest or mightiest person in unexplored territory. So, he's not staying at home with comfortable people that he knows, already has an idea of, already has sort of sized them up. He's going out into the unknown, journeying into the unknown, and finding the wisest or mightiest person, being, giant, whatever, that he can. And I mean, just that example right there, right off the bat, is like something worth striving for.
Definitely. And I'm glad you said all that, because I was actually going to bring that up as well, but you covered that. But yeah, exactly. Just he's going out to have a contest about old lore with that wise giant, not that kind of dumb giant, down the street. He's going to find the one that's going to be the hardest to beat. And that's exactly what we should strive for, is always go after the one that it means something if you're going to challenge yourself with them.
Yeah, you find someone you can contend with.
Exactly.
Right? Which is honestly something that everyone, I think, is really looking for in a partner, right? A husband or wife. And, if you surround yourself with friends that constantly challenge you and that you can contend with, and you're constantly making each other better, I mean, those are the best possible relationships you can have.
For sure. That's kind of the ideal.
So here we have Odin giving us that example here. So pretty clearly. And I think with that, I'll move on to the next stanza. Back to the poem. Frigg said, I would advise you, Odin, father of battles, to stay here, in the homes of the gods. I don't think there's any giant who is as wise as Riddle Weaver.
So in this verse, you have Frigg, I would say, gently, not so much discouraging Odin, but saying that, you know what, father of battles, you can stay here in the home of the gods. And I think father of battles is a bit of an appeal to Odin's pride, that, that you're the father of battles. You don't need to prove that you're as wise as, Riddle Weaver. And again, it's one of those cases where I know for myself, if I get a crazy idea in my head, my wife will be like, you already do this, this, and this. You don't really need to go and do this. And then, if I'm feeling particularly, strong-headed, I might be like, no, I have to. But sometimes my pride gets better. I mean, you're right, honey. I don't have to go and do that. But I really like that. One, it's such a normal conversation between a husband and wife, and that she is appealing to his pride. She's not saying like, oh, you couldn't go out and do it. It's more, you don't need to. And I think genuinely too, she doesn't necessarily want him to go. I mean, they enjoy each other's company. A lot of the names that Odin has is in relation to Frigg, like, Frigg's beloved and that kind of thing. And we saw in the Völuspá too that when Odin dies, it's her second greatest sorrow and that kind of thing. So they love each other and love spending time with each other. It's just, Odin wants to go out for an adventure, and she's kind of like, well, you could stay here with me, and it's pretty good here. And it is like, it is, there is time to stay home and be with family. But I think, as we'll see it for Odin right now, he has to go out and gain more wisdom and venture forth outside of, the warm home and everything he knows and is comfortable with to grow stronger.
Exactly. I wanted to make sure everyone's on the same page here, because in this episode we never actually properly introduced. Odin goes without an introduction,
for sure.
Sort of, but Frigg is the wife of Odin, if that wasn't previously clear. And we've seen her before in the Völuspá, especially as the mother of Baldr, and obviously Baldr dies. She loses Baldr. That's devastating for her. Loses Odin later in the story. Spoiler. But so she's gone through some things, or will go through some things. But she's really, I think if we're talking about her from an archetypal perspective, she is the embodiment of the positive mother, which I think it has to be said that Frigg is distinguished from other female figures, such as Freya in particular. There's some debate whether their two names essentially come from the same root. It's possible, but it's not completely clear. That's off the top of my head, best recollection on that anyway. But she is definitely in the mother stage of life, as opposed to as a maiden who is,
for sure.
In a lot of ways, Freya is playing in the games of competency similarly to the male figures in a lot of ways, whereas Frigg has entered into a different stage of life, that of motherhood and that of keeping the hearth and the home. She's a great figure, a fantastic.
Absolutely. I think the word that keeps coming to my mind is matriarch, and I think now we've lost sort of that idea of matriarch a little bit in this day and age, but
as a positive idea, and I mean, we don't talk about the matriarch of anything really, but it's in the archetypes and sort of back in the day, it was like the matriarch ran the household, and so that meant she was in charge of like the goings-ons, the slaves in many cases. She was the only one who was able to provide legitimate children for her husband, which that was super important for the children, because they could then inherit things, whereas the children born out of wedlock, they were often slaves and looked down upon. So it's a position of great status, and we see it here that Odin is listening to Frigg. So even the Allfather is going to heed what she says. So like that's real power right there. Definitely. And What's funny is that she is essentially the counterpart to Odin in this particular instance, in that she's advocating for caution and safety. And what's funny here is that the known is the masculine domain archetypally, and the unknown is the feminine domain archetypally. But in this case, Odin is going for the unknown, and Frigg is advocating caution, stay in the known. And really, that was just maybe something to point out, that these categories, these symbolic categories, are absolutely not restricted to one sex or the other. And they're not restricted to, men are all about, this domain of the known and ruling over everyone, and women are just these chaotic, weird things. It's symbolic. It's
yes, that's a great point. And we've mentioned this in a few other episodes, but it's probably worth mentioning here, is that when we're talking about sort of masculine and feminine archetypes and their, I don't want to say energies, but sort of their symbolism, it isn't really gendered. It doesn't refer to men and women. It's symbolism, I guess, is the best way to put it. So you have to try and divorce the idea that men are going to be masculine all the time. Well, no, they have both inside them, just like women have both inside them, and it's what archetype are they playing out right now? And that's really what we're looking at.
Exactly, and that's the perfect segue here. I think Odin is specifically here playing the role of the hero, the archetypal hero, whose goal it is to go out into chaos, to have one foot in the known, so he's got a firm foundation, but also have one foot out in the unknown, go on adventures, get the gold from the dragon, all those fun things. And Frigg is playing more of a role of protection and
yes,
and nurturing and whatnot, and definitely things that are associated with the mother. But if we just wait another couple of stanzas here, we'll see that play out
for sure.
A bit better.
She's, because we've talked about sort of the shadow side of the mother is the devouring mother, which is sort of consuming chaos. She's actually a very balanced mother here. She's not, and we'll see in the next stanza or two, she lets him go and wishes him well. So she's not saying you can't go and you're not good enough. It's just be cautious and make sure that you've got your head screwed on straight. Saying
wise things that I think we heard about in a previous poem called The Words of the High One. So maybe yes, Odin's getting some of his knowledge and his wisdom from his lovely wife.
No doubt.
So, and I just wanted to make one last point here about Frigg, that she has wisdom in her own right. So I mean, that ties in, but she knows about Vafthrudnir. Like, she knows about him. She knows his reputation. I don't think there's any giant who is as wise as Riddle Weaver. Like, come on. Like, she is, it's hard to say these gods, these characters, however you want to look at them, they're obviously embodying different things symbolically, and they're playing different roles, doing different things as characters. But I think Frigg and Odin talking as equals here, and her having some other wisdom there herself, some similar wisdom herself, she is at least equal to Odin in ways of her understanding of the world in a lot of ways. Like, equal's the wrong word. I don't even want to compare them, but she is up there. That's really
for sure
the overarching point. And I don't want to compare them, because that's not to say one is better than the other. That is completely not true, and I don't want to give that impression. She is formidably wise in her own right. That's the point I'm trying to get at.
They're well matched in their awesomeness. I don't know. They're both.
Well, they're a good match for each other.
Absolutely.
They're a fantastic example of just what a couple should be striving to be, a good match for each other.
For sure.
So I think it's time to move on.
Let's do it.
Back to the poem. Odin said, I have traveled so much, I have tried much, and I have often tested the mighty. Now I want to know what kind of hospitality there is in Riddle Weaver's hall.
So here we have again Odin talking about testing himself against the mighty. So he's always looking for the hardest opponent, the hardest challenge, the thing that's going to make him the most uncomfortable and the thing that's going to make him grow and get stronger. And he's obviously, he's traveled much and tried much. So he takes the path of most resistance, which is the best way to grow. There's no other really way to put it, is that you have to challenge yourself. You have to do things that are just outside of your ability so that you actually have to grow into it. Now, there is a danger where you could try and do something that is so far outside your capability that your attempt won't even really be an attempt. If you were to, tomorrow walk into like Ultimate Fighting and decide to, fight your first MMA fight against a professional, let's say the champion. Let's just make it crazy.
You're not a black belt in jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai and kickboxing.
You're not. Yeah.
Assuming you're not.
Yeah. So you're not going to be... You're kind of wasting your own time, and you're going to destroy yourself because you're up against something that you have no hope of mastering. But you could go up against, the other new guy, in your martial arts class, and that in itself for your level is a mighty contest, because you don't know if he's going to be able to beat you, and you don't but you're going to try, and you're going to force yourself to learn and master it. So, and that's why I would say Odin has traveled so much, is that he's had to work up to, the old wise giant. He couldn't just, wake up when he was 10 years old and go and do it. He's had to work up to it. So,
yeah. And one point I'll mention, you make a great point about, training yourself, growing yourself against and with people that are at a similar level, something where you can tackle the challenge sort of thing. And he absolutely does that. In other stories as well, he dispenses knowledge to people who might not know as much either. So it's not like he's just hoarding his gains, his training, his knowledge, his wisdom, whatever. He goes out and teaches, and that's also another way to be, but that's another way to grow. And that's sort of an aside, but that ties into, the idea of training martial arts as a very good example for this. I mean, you can't always be up against someone who is above you in level. Eventually you are going to be better than some other people, and you might have to train with them and teach them, and then you'll learn by teaching. And again, it's all just a part of this growing, just always be going for something. So I like that point.
Absolutely. And then he mentions hospitality, which in our previous podcast we haven't really talked too much about, like in the Voluspa it comes up, and in the Havamal definitely, like how to be hospitable. But we're going to see it in action, and I don't think we can emphasize too much how important it is, just as sort of the everyday for the people who are listening to this, way back when, that hospitality was just like the normal thing, if you go to a store and someone's coming behind you as you enter and you open the door for them, you don't really think about it, but it's the same way that some of the things that we're going to see in this, they wouldn't necessarily have thought about it. It wasn't really a big deal because it was just an automatic thing. It was just part of their everyday life and culture. So I just want to make that point about hospitality, that it's intrinsic into their life, and it's a huge part of it.
Absolutely. It's yeah, that's a great point, and we will see it in action, which is going to be good. Good to have examples there. The couple of points I wanted to make, you touched on it. You know, Odin has traveled a lot, faced a lot of challenges and whatnot, and you know he's always looking for more. Fantastic. But I think another idea that he's getting at, you know, I have tried much. You know, that's his turn of phrase. He's implying that he's good at a lot of things, and he tests himself in a lot of things, and that sort of gets at the idea that you know, some of the most successful people in the world, you know, they are extremely good at one thing. They are extremely good at this one thing, and they put their entire life into it. You know, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, right? Like these incredibly successful people. There's other fields. I'm not just talking about Silicon Valley type things, but yeah, like they just go for one thing, and they're very, 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 very good at that one thing. But then the other way you can be in the world is you can try to be good at the set of games, good across many dominance hierarchies. And that's just, you know, in whatever you do, challenge yourself. That's the underlying message to that, to how to be good at all these different things, is you have to, first of all, participate. You have to get yourself out there into the unknown. You have to test yourself. And then you also have to make sure that you're doing it in a way that is going to grow you. And I mean, of course, you can't be good at everything. You can't become the best at everything, but you can become competent in many things. And that's the idea, the overarching idea that I think this is getting at a little bit, is that, you know, no matter what you get into, you should be trying to be as good as you possibly can be at that time. That's sort of what I think I'm reading there, something to that effect. And an example of this from the rest of the lore, I really should have double-checked a couple of the details about him, but what comes to mind is the character Egil Skallagrimsson. I forget which saga he's in. I'll have to go find that, but he was an Icelandic, you know, warrior, and you know was well regarded for his prowess there, right? But he was also a great poet, so good at lots of different things. The multifaceted nature, for sure.
And actually, I think it's just called the Eagles Saga.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, you might be right. So there we go. Me and my forgetfulness and not taking good enough notes sometimes. That's all I had for that stanza. If you're good.
I'm good.
Okay. Back to the poem. Frigg said, "Then travel safe and come back in one piece. Stay safe on your journey, Odin. May your wits serve you well wherever you go, when you exchange words with the giant."
So here we have Frigg, who said to Odin, you know, why don't you stay home? You don't need to go do this. And then Odin says, you know, I've traveled much. I've often tested the mighty, and now I have to go test someone who's even mightier. And Frigg decides that she's not going to... I think there's a realization that this is actually good for Odin, and that she wishes him well and says, travel in peace, and it's, you know, may your wits serve you. It's like, again, I think it's just really nice. Like they're obviously quite supportive of each other, and she obviously wants him to come home, and sort of, you know, you hope that your wife would also be supportive when you would go out and go out for your own adventure, and to be supportive of your wife when she needs to go out and do her adventures. And again, we see emphasis on wits, and if you listen to our Havamal podcast, there's a great emphasis on wits and maintaining them when you're traveling, and that, you know, good wits are even better than money when you're traveling. So you might have even got that, you know, the Havamal sayings of the High One. Like, we're seeing Frigg say that right there. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of that stuff is Frigg's wisdom as well.
Exactly. No, it's great. I mean, it's fantastic that she wants him to succeed, and you got it earlier. This is what we were talking about. She's not the devouring mother, which can also be the devouring wife, essentially.
For sure.
Right? Wanting to smother and create dependent children, essentially. She wants her husband to succeed, doesn't hold him back. And I mean, yeah, that right there, I think it's just a good example of a healthy partnership as well. I mean, Odin's the one who wants to go off on the adventure in this case, but I mean, I think the lesson absolutely goes both ways, like you said. I mean, if both partners are supportive of each other in their endeavors, right, in their adventures, however you want to phrase it, that's going to be positive for the both of you. And I mean, I think it's you have to be cautious whenever you go out into the unknown. That is basically stanza 1 of the Havamal.
Yes.
Right? Be cautious when you enter into any doorway, paraphrasing. But still go. Like that's the point. And she understands that, and she's just making sure Odin remembers that, all the things. And no, it's great. And to me, this is one of the things that just emphasizes and nails down that Frigg is, and that's always going to be funny. People use her name as a swear word, which is funny, and they probably don't. I don't think that's actually even the same.
No, I think it's a substitution for the other F word.
Yeah, but no, that's funny anyway. Frigg is the positive mother. I mean, you say balanced, and I think you meant balanced in a good way. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, balanced between sort of the shadow and the consciousness. Yeah, that she's clearly integrated, like her Jungian shadow, if we're talking about that. So that, you can usually tell when someone has integrated their shadow because they don't. Well, for example, in this one, she's not threatened by Odin going out. Her concern about him going out is just for her safety because, she cares about him. Like, it's not like, oh, you're always leaving me, or, oh, you're going to go and do this and forget all about me. It's not needy. It's not, there's no self-esteem issues that are coming up for her. It's just concern that, make sure you've got your wits about you. Yeah. So, and that's what I mean is that she knows herself well, I guess is how I'd put that.
Right. Well, no, and you make a good point, and that's a level of Jungian theory that I personally haven't gotten too deep into myself, honestly. So yeah, that's a great point. But to me, I contrast that with someone who hasn't integrated themselves and whatnot. Like this is a positive.
Yes, absolutely. It's a positive. It's the positive archetype. It's it's sort of what we should strive for is what it is. Yeah,
exactly. There's always the positive and the negative, and I mean we haven't had an example of that. And actually, I don't know. We might see some examples of that, but probably more in the sagas.
Definitely.
Honestly, but you do have to have that positive and the negative. You have to, or else you're not seeing a complete picture of the world, right? So, anyway, I think that's we won't hear any more about Frigg again. But even just essentially these 4 stanzas, these 2 where she's speaking, we learn so much about her and her character, and that's fantastic
for sure.
So, back to the poem.
Let's do it.
All right. Odin then went to test the wisdom of that wise giant. Odin came to the hall Riddle Weaver owned, and he went straight inside.
I really like that last line, and he went straight inside. He doesn't dilly-dally. He's not questioning himself about whether or not he can do it. It's just he goes to his hall. He knows where he's going and goes straight in. There's just something admirable about that where you just go for it. And yeah, he's because you can imagine, well, I mean, whenever you have to do something that you're supposed to do, there's usually procrastination. Like I remember in university, if you wanted a student to clean their room, just give them an essay due like in a week, and they'll be cleaning the room. My sister, I knew she had exams because I'd come home and there'd be all this baking, like dozens and dozens of cookies and whatever, because she didn't go straight inside. And that's not a knock on her. Everyone does it, but except for Odin, apparently. There's no procrastination there. It's just he goes straight in, right for the goal. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I mean that was really the point that I took out of the stanza as well. I mean, he faces his challenge directly. It's no hesitation. What better example can you have of? To me, I think it's something like when you set your mind to something, just do it 100%. Get after it. You know, it's there's a time for preparation, for planning, everything like that. But then you just have to execute the plan, and I think that's this. So go straight inside.
Straight inside.
I don't have any more about this stanza. And
no, let's get to the riddles.
Yeah. Well, and quite honestly, I think we're going to blast through these next few. This is a much more narrative poem. It's got an actual narrative structure to it in a more traditional sense. You know, the Valispa was a story, but it was a dense story.
Yes.
Every stanza was incredibly meaningful, and that's not to say this isn't the same, but there are some that are definitely moving the story forward, and we got a couple of those coming up here. So back to the poem. Odin said, "Hail, Riddle Weaver. I have come to your hall for the purpose of seeing you. The first thing I want to know is if you are wise, or perhaps even all-knowing."
So Odin is very clear in his goal, which you want to be when you set your mind to something. You want to have a clear goal in mind. And I think he's actually kind of feeling out Riddle Weaver, or was it Vafthrudnir? Okay, I'm going to butcher that a few more times, but so he's going in with his goal in mind, and I think he's being wise about it in that he's kind of feeling it out to see if he's a worthy opponent, and if he is a worthy opponent, just how worthy is he in that. Has Odin maybe bitten off more than he can chew? I mean, it's what you do in every situation. When you're doing something new, you start feeling it out and trying to figure out where your skill lies at in relation to the difficulty of the task at hand. And I think we're seeing a bit of that right here.
I would agree. And honestly, I think he was being a tad provocative here, to be honest.
For sure.
Like in the next stanza, we'll see that he got a bit of a reaction, and I think that was the point. You know, if you want to see someone's true colors, I suppose the idea would be provoke them a little bit, just enough for them to show their teeth or something like that.
Definitely
show you their cards, play their hand, something like that. The line that I really like here, though, I have come to your hall for the purpose of seeing you. So he I'm sure he's talking literally here. I've come here to see you. Like, that's it. That's his purpose. But then it's the idea of seeing you, and I think that's in the connotation here is something like he wants to. If you want to see something, first of all, you're setting your goal. If you are looking at someone, if you're looking anywhere with your eyes, you are setting that as your goal. That's the thing you're focusing on. And Odin is doing that here with Vafthrudnir. And then the idea there as well is maybe to go a level deeper and to really see who Vafthrudnir is, if that makes sense. So just by that one word, the way he says it, I get something to the effect of he knows what his goal is, he knows what his purpose is, and then it's also to know and understand, to see and to understand, to discern. So that's what I get out of that particular line. So
I definitely agree with you. I know that we see a whole bunch of stuff in our field of vision, but our sight or our direction is goal oriented. So unless it's your goal, it's just sort of, it's either background noise or like an obstacle or a method on how you're going to attain the goal. So I think you're right in reading into that his goal is seeing him and talking to him and trading riddles with him. And so he's ignoring everything else. And ignoring might not be the right word, but everything else is in low resolution. It's not the important stuff. What he's doing right now, finding out if he's wise and all-knowing, that's the important part.
Absolutely. I think we can fairly assume that Odin took his nice look into the hall and et cetera, and followed his own advice.
For sure, definitely. Looked in the corners.
Exactly. But now he's good to go. Hail, riddle, weaver, etc. Back to the poem. Riddle Weaver said, "Who is this man who stands in my hall? Who is this I'm speaking to? You won't leave my hall unless you prove yourself to be even wiser than I am."
And so I think when we talked about Odin provoking Vafthrudnir, Riddle Weaver, by provoking him, he didn't give himself an out. He removed all the ways that he could, weasel out of it if it got too hard. Sort of, burning the ships after you land so that you're stuck there. Because now it's the only way he's going to leave is if he's wiser than him, and I mean the implication is that Riddle Weaver will kill him. And I think that's a wise lesson anytime that you are facing a challenge. In that, when you're facing that challenge, don't necessarily give yourself an out. Go for it. And I mean, most of the things in our lives won't kill us if it's a challenge, but in a more archetypal way, it might, because the person that we are going into the challenge is different than the person who faces and overcomes the challenge. So I think it sort of speaks to that, well, especially if if you fail at a challenge, you have to change to overcome it eventually. So you will die if you fail. And it's not to be overly dramatic, but if you can't overcome something, and you have to change so that the person that you are changes and is no longer there. And that's basically what's being laid out here.
Yeah, you either have to change in order to overcome the obstacle, or change because you cannot live with this wretched person who can't overcome this obstacle. So
exactly.
It's one or the other, essentially. Yeah. No, that's a fantastic point. I really didn't have much other than that. It was really like he accepts the challenge, but your point was fantastic. I don't think I was even going to go there. So that's all I had really.
There we go
on that one. So, and again, really just we're moving the story along. So here we go. Back to the poem. Odin said, "My name is Good Advisor, and I come to your hall thirsty from a long journey. After my long trip, I have need of hospitality and a good welcome, giant."
So here we see sort of the most basic hospitality customs. We have Odin coming in, announcing his name, saying he's thirsty, and in the Havamal, they make a good point of offering your guest a drink. And we still do it now. I mean, when a friend comes over, you say, "Hey, do you need anything to drink or eat?" And, a good welcome, which would be a drink and maybe, a warm place to get out of the wet or the cold, especially, in Northern Europe back in the day when, well, even now, I mean, it's cold and wet there.
You can die by just going for a
sure.
walk in the woods in Norway or something like that.
Yeah, it's we're safe, but we're still not that safe,
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so it's just it's part of the story that it would be sort of in any story that of someone going to someone else's hall. It's just okay, offering a drink and hospitality and a welcome. It sort of gives it sets a context of sort of where this is taking place. So it's taking place for people listening to this. It'd be like, oh, this could be anywhere that I've been. I know this custom. I know what this is like. This is very similar to how I treat my guests, sort of thing. So I think it's sort of a move the story along and just add color to the narrative.
I agree there. I mean, it's not like this is giving us some great symbolic view of life or anything like that, but it's emphasizing that hospitality is the sort of core central thing. I mean, in some ways, Odin is effectively reminding Vafthrudnir that hospitality is also his responsibility, something like that. And I mean that's true. The hospitality is the responsibility there, but Odin isn't like at the beginning here. He's not behaving great.
No, he isn't. Hospitality is a two-way street. Odin's kind of being a jerk. So I think he's first of all mellowing the situation down. Maybe this is sort of, you mentioned he's not going to weasel his way out of anything, but I mean, he also doesn't want to die. So no,
he might be hedging his bets slightly, just in the sense of trying to calm the situation down a little, but
Plus, we talked a little bit about him sizing up the situation. He's probably seen what he needed to see, and now he's like, okay, let's calm this down so that we can get to it. But yeah,
exactly. Good stanza, and I think it just emphasizes hospitality in action. And here we go, back to the poem. Riddle Weaver said, "Well then, good advisor, why are you still standing up? Take a seat in my hall. Then we'll find out who knows more, the guest or his wise old host."
So we see Riddle Weaver, I guess, remembering his manners and, giving Odin a seat. And I'd say sort of that, I'm imagining that sort of forced, like, well, then welcome and have a seat, and then we'll see who's... Oh, you know what? We'll just see who's going to be the wise one here. And it's sort of they're just about to get into it. They're going to sit down and do the things that you sort of have to do before you can get into the meat of a challenge, and that just sort of the normal everyday things, Like we all have that kind of stuff. It's just normal everyday stuff that we have to do in order to be able to test ourselves, whether that's going grocery shopping or whatever. It's kind of on that level of hospitality is definitely on that level of normal everyday stuff that you have to do.
It's really here. I mean, you could understand, if someone's being a jerk, you turn them away, but really, you would be breaking the social contract. Vafthrudnir here would be breaking the social contract if he just turned away the stranger and said, okay, well, I'm just going to kill you because you're a jerk. He didn't do that. He's playing the game.
Yes.
Playing along.
He's playing along.
And really, that's just an example of, everyone playing the same shared game. I mean, that's what all the various cultures of the world are ultimately doing. They are playing a shared game with one another within the space that they exist, right? So within, whatever country or whatever city or town or region, whatever, the people broadly agree to play by the same rules. And if you violate that, that's, when bad things start to happen. So Vafthrudnir plays out the social contract, but he's still having his fun, his game, his threats of death. So That's fun. I missed actually in the last stanza just good advisor, the implications of that name, Odin picking that for himself. So I mean, first of all, he's implying wisdom, right? He's pumping his tires a little bit, I think, but he's implying wisdom. But the idea, I think, as well, just good. He's implying goodness, which I think I read more as competence here. He's good at advising, therefore he's good. But from another side, maybe he's also implying a good natured, like he's not evil, something like that. Is that I don't know? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I think it's about. I think he's kind of showing Riddle Weaver that he would be a worthy foe as well. That he's up to the challenge. That he's not coming in to. Well, I guess he is kind of coming in to do harm, but it's a game that they're agreeing to play with each other. He's not coming in as to take advantage. He's coming in to kind of like, I guess the turn of phrase would be like on the square. He's coming in being like, this is what I want. He's not going to stab him in the back. Something we should mention, at least just for the narration, is that Riddle Weaver doesn't know it's Odin. That's important. So the name Good Advisor, Gagnarad, that he doesn't see that this is one of Odin's many disguises that he uses when he's traveling in Midgard. Or I guess, would this be Jotunheim?
I think this is Jotunheim,
yeah,
technically.
Well, he travels throughout the realms and uses various disguises. But yeah, so that's part of the what the name is for too, is just to hide his identity until it's revealed.
It's one reason there's so much of that. So many names for Odin. One reason. Anyway, back to the poem. Odin said, "A poor man, if he visits a rich man, ought to be silent, or say only what he must. Too much talk will bring harm to the guest of a grudging host."
This is interesting because one thing I just realized, and I don't know if it's just ripped out of the Havamal as is, but there are certainly a few stanzas in the Havamal that read very much like this. And so, it's quite interesting to think that we're seeing a lot of shared wisdom between the two poems, which I like because of the continuity of it. That's sort of beside the point, but it's neat to see that there is that continuity and that there is that understanding that these are kind of truths for the Northern European peoples at the time, that these nuggets of wisdom were just sort of understood as how you go about your day. And I think we're actually seeing Odin pull a bit of a fast one on Riddle Weaver in making him go first and ask the questions, because Riddle Weaver sort of says, "Who knows more, the guest or his wise old host?" And then Odin basically puts the onus on Riddle Weaver to start it. And archetypally, I'm not sure if, like, when you go after a challenge, I mean, we could probably debate whether you want to sort of attack the challenge first, but I guess a lot of times you're not expecting the challenge or how it's going to present itself, so you're reacting, and we are seeing that here, that he's letting Riddle Weaver go first, and he'll have to react to it. But there's also faith in his ability that whatever Riddle Weaver's about to say, he's going to be able to handle, and I think that's worth mentioning as well.
Yeah, great points there. I mean, I think this one is like that. That was my note here too. I don't think this is like ripped from the Havamal, but it's the same structure.
Sure.
It's the same type of wisdom, and I really like that as well. I mean, you say continuity, and that's exactly what it is. And I mean, really, it's that poem or book or whatever of wisdom, it's applied, right? I think we're going to see as we go here, these more narrative stories where the gods are actually doing things in a more relatable manner. Again, contrasting that to the Vospa, which is really a high level sacred text sort of thing. These are more, narrative stories about things that the gods are doing. And I think that is just going to be this wisdom applied. So that's really good. And your point about I just got that actually, how he's sort of putting the onus on Vafthrudnir to talk. I actually thought it was pretty natural that Vafthrudnir would sort of do the questioning first, because it's sort of like, you've come into my hall, now I'm gonna see if you even know anything, sort of thing. So I thought that was pretty natural, but now I see essentially how Odin is turning that around, or at least making sure that that's what happens. So that's pretty cool, and really. It's sort of respectful as well, sort of. I mean, on the one hand, Odin's the one who's going to be answering next, but he's letting the other person talk first. Is that? I think that's sort of, he's doing listening first, sort of letting the other person start things off the way he wants to, be comfortable, something like that. He's still understanding that he is a guest, which I think we have established is, in a lot of ways, it's best to listen and to let the other person go first. Assume the other person you're talking to might have something to say, something you don't know.
For sure. And actually, I have in my notes for this verse, don't abuse hospitality, because it is a two-way street between the guest and the host. There's things that both have to do for it to work. And maybe I just have a vision of Odin that's sneakier and more underhanded than he's being right now. But what he is saying is true, that, the poor man, if he visits a rich man, ought to be silent. I mean, and I would go further than that and just say, when you go to visit someone, you don't want to just go and take over the conversation and sort of dominate the social setting. You're a guest in their house, and because of that, you sort of understand that there's a saying that a man stoops his shoulders under another man's roof, and it's sort of that understanding that whatever the custom of their house is, you're going to follow it because you are a guest in their house, and that's the polite thing to do, the hospitable thing to do.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought you were getting at there. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Totally agree. So from here on out, an hour in, we're now going to be going into the actual riddles here. Took us an hour, that preamble there. From here on out, we're going to be doing 2 stanzas at a time, unless otherwise mentioned here, essentially. So the next stanza is stanza 11, and so I'm going to be reading 11 and then 12. It's the question, then the answer. So back to the poem. Riddle Weaver said, "Tell me, good advisor, if you want to test yourself, sitting in your seat in my hall, what is the name of the horse who pulls the sun over the humans below?" Odin said, "That horse is named Skinfaxi. He pulls the bright sun over the humans below. Everyone thinks he's the best horse who lives in Midgard. The mane of that horse always shines."
So Skinfaxi, they actually kind of allude to it in the verse. The name actually just means shining mane. And I look at this particular riddle as of sort of the entry level, the first level riddle of starting with the easy stuff first and then progressing as things, just sort of progressing as they go, because they're going to see exactly what their level of wisdom is. Because the sun is, it's so obvious. It's right there in the sky every day. Like, what can you say to to express how obvious it is? It's sort of that thing that you go outside and You don't really even notice it because it's just there. When you wake up in the morning and it's light out, it's because of the sun. There's no... It might be the most obvious thing. And so he's just asking, okay, well, how does it travel across the sky? And so for the Norse and Northern European peoples, they had this idea that there was a horse pulling it because it moved across the sky. And what moves things? Well, horses move things. And this isn't to like make fun of them. Oh, look at these stupid people who thought there were horses flying across the sky. It was just a way of explaining that the sun moves across the sky, and they were able to use a horse as a symbol. And I would say that they knew it was a symbol. I'm not sure how literal they thought it was, other than seeing the sun move. Like, I'm not sure that they actually thought there was a horse there. I don't know.
Yeah, that is a really good point, actually. To me, the horse brings about, in this case, something about power. I mean,
absolutely,
we still measure trucks and horsepower, right?
Definitely.
And other pieces of heavy equipment, right? And so, I mean, I think it's not a person, but it's effectively a personification. What's the word for that if it's not a person? There's got to be a word for that. I don't know.
No, I think personification is the...
It's still valid, still applies?
Yes.
Okay. It's a personification of this concept of the movement of the sun as, something powerful, something that is used for transportation is moving the sun along. And so, I mean...
For sure. And then horses, of course, I can't believe I just said that. They were a measure of wealth as well. And, the sun being golden light, there was an understanding of, I guess, the power of the sun, even if, we know now without the sun we all die. I don't know if they would have known to the extent, but they did know that when the sun went down, they were more likely to die. And that they needed the sun to, for food, like to grow things on their farms and that kind of thing. So they were aware of its importance to life, even if they didn't have sort of the, Copernicus hadn't seen the sun yet. Copernicus, right? No, Galileo. Who am I thinking? Yeah, one of them.
Yeah.
But they didn't have that, so-called scientific knowledge, but they understood its effect on their lives. So,
well, that's a fantastic point to bring up. It's fairly ridiculous if you think about it to put the standards of science and scientific theory on people who are just trying to understand and explain the world, but didn't think like that whatsoever. I mean, even the Greek philosophers who, Aristotle, I think, is the most appropriate one here, the developer of something that was starting to resemble logical reasoning. Was that Aristotle? Or
yes. No, it was Aristotle.
So he wasn't being scientific in the case of, develop test cases and control methods and, go through it in a rigorous manner. He was observing. And I mean, that was fantastic. Learning that, the things that you see might mean something a little bit deeper than meets the eye, something like that. I mean, those were great ideas, but it still doesn't explain everything. And scientific ideas, the scientific method, scientific theory is effectively 400 years old.
For sure.
And these stories are from at least double that amount of time. Double. So it's unfair to put scientific explanations for things on people who are still trying to explain the world. And that, to me, is admirable. Because, honestly, if someone is like, well, there's that big ball and things are warm when it's up there and then things are cold when it's not there, and, well, I don't know. That's not a way to be in the world. And I mean, our ancestors were smarter than that. Our ancestors were not stupid. They weren't scientists, and they didn't have access to the tools and the technology that would allow them to be scientists. But they were still thinking, this is moving across the sky. Something, and then the metaphor for something that is moving across the sky. And then they were still an Earth-centric model
definitely.
of the world, right? So, like, I mean, they didn't understand that the Earth is going around the sun, but you know, do you blame them?
No. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where we thought the Earth went around the sun. Like, it wasn't long ago in the vast scheme of things. You mentioned Aristotle, and I just want to go off on a small tangent here about his science, I guess you'd call it, is that he had sort of 4 qualities that he'd look at in anything to understand it. And the 4th one was probably the most important. It was called the telos in Greek, and it means the end, meaning what's the end purpose of whatever. And that's a great way to understand how people looked at the world, is what value did this thing have, and that's how they understood what was the value of it. So what is the value of the sun? Well, they've given this, the best horse is pulling the sun. So there's an obvious understanding that there was great value in the sun. So, it wasn't this idea of seeing things in value, and we talked about it already in this podcast, actually, is that, you know, we see things as, you know, goals, and, you know, obstacles are things that are helping us get to that goal. And so we automatically give value to it. And it's the same, it's the worldview at the time, is that they looked at the value of the thing in relation to what they were doing, not scientific, where there's a value of it, and there's also its components that go into it. So yeah, it's important to mention that, because we're going to be seeing a lot of explanations for how the world is around them that have horses or sort of supernatural elements to it. But even if the explanation isn't scientific, you can understand the value that it had in their life by what they're saying about it and how important it was, or what they used it for.
Exactly. I couldn't say it better. So let's move on, I think.
For sure.
Back to the poem. Tell me, good advisor, if you want to test yourself, sitting in your seat in my hall, what is the name of the horse who pulls the moon east to west at night over the mighty gods? Odin said, that horse is named Hrimfaxi, who pulls the moon east to west every night over the mighty gods. The slobber from his mouth falls to the ground every morning, and that's the reason for the dew.
I think that's an awesome reason for dew. I really love that's their explanation. And Hrimfaxi, that translates to frost mane. So you've got shining mane and frost mane, and I think the reason is kind of obvious. The night's colder, and the moon shines, but like everything else, it's in the dark, so you're not seeing it. And as well, I think, especially like the further you get up in the northern hemisphere, and you have 6 months of darkness during the coldest time. It's the coldest time of year because you don't have the sun. So frost is it's no wonder they associated frost with the night and with the moon. And of course, it does get colder. Even if you're more south in the northern hemisphere, it does get a lot colder at night. So, and again, it's their explanation for things and why, like if you've ever been outside in the summer, at least I guess you wouldn't see dew in the winter, but yeah, in the summer. So especially like if you get up pretty early, just as the sun's coming up, it's chilly out and the grass is wet, and it's something they would have all seen. Like, well, why is the grass wet? It didn't rain last night. Well, the slobber from Frostmane created it, didn't it? They didn't know about condensation, but they had this explanation, and it was good enough for what they needed it for, because it served its purpose.
Exactly. It's more an explanation of natural phenomena again, and exactly, as long as you think about it as a symbol, it makes sense, and it's something that actually works. And I think I like a couple of things here compared to the last pair of stanzas here. So first of all, specifying that it's pulling east to west, so they understand something about direction. They understand something about these are concepts that actually talk about time essentially. Like these are the sun and the moon. They tell the time. They tell the seasons. This isn't the only time we're going to reference the sun and the moon here in this poem. And so I mean, this is the most basic understanding, and then some of the most basic ways of understanding the world, I think, is another way to put it. And so if you're going over some factual knowledge, start with the basics. That's really true here, I think. So
for sure, I'm glad you mentioned that, because as I was looking at it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's actually a huge thing, understanding direction and time. It orients you in the world, and it tells you when you can do things.
Exactly. And so, I mean, it shows the sophistication of these people. That's for sure. Sophistication, I mean, not in the way that, hoity-toity that we would see these days, but it's a sophistication in their understanding of the world. And it just shows that they've got more understanding, they've got more going on than, you might give people credit for 1,000 years ago, right? So it's pretty good.
Definitely.
Okay, back to the poem. Riddle Weaver said, "Tell me, good advisor, if you want to test yourself sitting in your seat in my hall, what is the name of the river that separates the lands of the gods from the giants?" Odin said, "That river is named Ifing, which separates the lands of the gods from those of the giants. That river will run free forever. It will never freeze over."
So before I get into the name of the river, because it's awesome, I want to talk about the importance of the river running free forever, never freezing over. It means that it can't be readily crossed, so that the known area of the gods won't spill into the unknown area of the giants, and vice versa. They're not going. If there's going to be an invasion, it's not going to be across that river. And the river name Ifing translates to if or doubt. And I love that, because that doubt is exactly the boundary between the area that the known territory, and the unknown chaos beyond it. That what is out there, you don't know. It is doubt, and that they named it that blows my mind. It's just so right, because when you're going out into the chaos, your mind is full of doubts. Because you don't know what's going to happen. And I know for some people, like, just that anxiety is what keeps them in the known area.
Absolutely. No, I mean, you're exactly right. You have to cross your doubts to, like, I mean, that understanding, it's amazing. And I think it's obvious as well, when you dig into it, that they had some understanding of known versus unknown. I mean, they delineate the world that way so clearly in the mythology here, so clearly. And well, you got it exactly what I wanted to touch on as well. I mean, it's a barrier, and to me, the little nuance that I got from it flows free forever. It's also just an idea that there's always going to be an unknown. There's always going to be the known territory and the unknown territory, and by definition, you cannot remove the barrier between the two. So that's
a great point.
Yeah, so I think between the two of those things, this is such a fantastic idea. This one little bit is just, to me, it's almost mind-boggling that these people had such a good understanding of how the world really works on a symbolic level, that really their entire mythology, cosmology, everything was effectively built around this idea of the known and the unknown, of order versus chaos, of the land of the gods versus the land of the giants, and it has this permanent barrier. Fantastic.
Yeah, awesome.
Did you have anything more on this one, or?
No, I'm good to go.
Okay, so the only other thing I wanted to touch on just was the idea of a river as a natural barrier. I mean, really, we have covered that effectively here, but it would even create borders between tribes as well. Like, I mean, it's such a natural point, unless it's, I mean, I guess you wouldn't even call it a river if it's that easily crossed, right? Even the Romans, they had a hard time establishing territory across the Danube. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Which is essentially the Germanic peoples were on the other side. It's a little fuzzy actually as to who exactly was on the other side. It could have been some Celtic people, could have been some Germanic people, but broadly the agreed upon consensus from the historians of that time was that it was Germanic peoples on the other side, which is just sort of an irony that we're talking about that here. But anyway, it's really just for them to take that symbolism and apply it on a cosmic level. Like they're sort of layering it, layering that symbolism that would have been around naturally into the cosmic and into the psychological understanding of their world. So,
and that's why it works so well. Like that's exactly it.
Absolutely. Okay, back to the poem, I think. Riddle Weaver said, "Tell me, good advisor, if you want to test yourself sitting in your seat in my hall, what is the name of the valley where Surt will lead the final battle against the gods?" Odin said, "That valley is named Vigrith, where Surt will lead the final battle against the gods. It is 100 miles long on each side. That's why this valley is chosen."
So the name Vigrith translates to battle surge. So basically it's just a place where you can have a battle, and I think the 100 miles long is a symbol for it goes on forever. Like it's an idea that the biggest battle of all time is going to happen in this place, and it can hold it. And it's also sort of where the things end. And it's interesting to me because the idea of sort of a final climactic battle in a valley isn't exclusive to Northern Europe. The idea of Armageddon, that's actually the name of the valley that is, I guess, outside of Israel or in Israel, that where, I guess Jesus and the angels are supposed to fight the devil that last time, kind of thing. Like it's kind of it's a sort of a well used symbol throughout the world for the final battle.
Yeah, those connections there in different traditions, always great to sort of see them, because it points to there being some common lines of thought from some supposedly different groups of people who went off in their own directions, whether through contact or, I prefer, there's some deep ideas within us that have kind of progressed there. And, I think you got everything I wanted to touch on, really. It's just the scale of this final battle, honestly, is all I really wanted to emphasize here. But the switch here that's happened, we've gone from sort of these really factual things that are really just, okay, do you know about this part of the world? Do you know about this? You know about this? To what will happen. So
yes.
So he's making sure that Odin knows a little bit of prophecy, a little bit of things that, if you're thinking about it reasonably, logically from today's perspective, something like that, at the very least, he's making sure Odin knows the shared mythology of what will happen. Because to me, one reason why I can see how Jesus Christ in Christianity is so good at getting all these prophecies correct is because they talked about it a lot in
definitely
in their societies, and they knew what the prophecies were, and so cynically you could think maybe someone was going to be able to fulfill them somehow by claiming some kind of lineage or whatever. Cynically. By the same token, I can be cynical here and say, at the very least, Vafthrudnir is making sure that Odin also knows that same shared prophecy. So, I mean, if we're being cynical, which is no fun, let's just admit that. It could be just making sure that Odin is well versed enough that he understands what is supposed to happen in the future. But really, what's more fun is that he's making sure that Odin actually has some forethought, some prophecy, and that he's gone and gathered that knowledge. And so it's a different type of knowledge. So wisdom.
Definitely. I totally agree. And we'll see that play out in the next stanza.
Absolutely. So here we go. This is the last time we see a single stanza here, actually, to be honest. So we're on number 19. Back to the poem. Riddle Weaver said, "You are wise indeed, guest. Come sit at my bench. Let's talk together here. Let's wager our heads on which of us two is wiser here in my hall. Guest."
I like the emphasis you put on guest. Because I think you got it right. So it's clear he was testing Odin out to see, like, where is your level of wisdom at? Like, what do you know? Do you know your geography and all that kind of stuff? Do you know the prophecy? Are you at least on a level that is worth my time? And then he says, "Let's wager our heads on which to us is wiser." And that is sort of exactly how you're supposed to challenge yourself. Is you have to have skin in the game, as the saying goes, so that, because if you don't, then you don't really care, and you can always fall back on, oh, if I was doing this for real, then it would have gone differently. Which is usually not true. Usually you would have failed, maybe even worse, because you'd be scared you've got skin in the game. So they're now going to be wagering sort of their most important possessions, their heads. And while I totally think they literally mean heads, as in they will decapitate one or the other if they lose, I also think there's something to be said about in wagering their heads as a symbol for their sort of worldview. Who's going to sort of blow the mind of the other one first? Because as you go, there's some, I would say, mind-blowing. We even have that as part of our language. Oh, that blew my mind. That was mind-boggling. That, it just, when you learn something profound or see something crazy, it changes how you look at the world, and you kind of have to reorient yourself. So I think it works on both levels, that it's literally the head, but also sort of the worldview.
Yeah, I like that point there, that particular nuance you've seen there. I think similarly, it's something like, what I got out of this was that this is something that you should be willing to stake your life on, literally or at least metaphorically. Like, if you are confident enough in your beliefs, you should be able to be challenged on them, and you should be able to go and debate. You should be able to go have those discussions, but you also want to be confident. You don't want to be flimsy. Like that's just not a position. Well, first of all, it's not a position of strength. So I mean, you're not going to do well. But also on the other side of it, you're not going to convince anyone if you also don't believe wholeheartedly that what you believe is the truth. And that's not to be stubborn, because again, here with the wager, right? Like, that's one of them is going to come out on top, is what they're kind of saying here. And it could be either of them. That's effectively what this wager is. And I mean, this is just putting stakes, the highest possible stakes, to the idea of debating. I mean, it's not like they're going to physically go try and take each other out. They are comparing who has the greater knowledge, the best wisdom. It really just puts an emphasis on how valued wisdom and knowledge and experience really was, which is just a good example for us today to not ignore that, really. And yeah, again, for me, I just think it's a good goal to be able to stake your life literally or metaphorically on what you believe in.
Definitely. That's profound.
All good. Didn't know I was capable. Great. This is one of my favorite stanzas of the whole poem, really, because it's just so deep, that this particular line, right?
For sure.
Love it. And really just, you touched on it as well, the idea that this is a transition. He's satisfied with Odin. Now we're going to see Odin's going on the offensive now. So this is definitely a transition, and we're going to take a turn from here on out.
For sure.
So back to the poem. Starting at stanza 20, by the way. Odin said, "Tell me this first, if your wits serve you well. If you know it, riddle weaver. How did the earth come to be, or heaven? Which one was the first, giant?"
So,
oops. I only said the question.
You want to go for go give the answer, and then we'll get into it.
I forgot. Riddle Weaver said, "The earth was made from Ymir's flesh. The rocks were made from his bones. The sky was made from the skull of that ice-cold giant. The sea was made from his blood." There we go. I even, we drew all these out for which one to, and I still couldn't. It's okay.
So, the first thing that I notice here, and especially I think because Odin, they've wagered their heads, I kind of get a feeling that Odin isn't joking around anymore. The hospitality is kind of, it's there as contract only, but there's no warmth between the two. Even like playful warmth, it's not there. Now they're in it. And so you have, the first few questions of Riddle Weaver were kind of, geography questions of here and now, and the sun, which is, the most obvious thing in the world. So then Odin's first question is, how did the earth come to be? How, what came first, earth or heaven? And the thing about this question is that Odin was there to make these things. He saw it, so he's going to know if the Riddle Weaver knows what he's talking about, or if he's just trying to, bluff his way through and not lose his head. So it's great. It's hardcore. He's in it to win it.
Yeah, he's asking questions that he knows the answer to, and I mean I think that's part of the rules of the game, right? And isn't that sort of how Frodo, Bilbo wins the game? He effectively cheats by saying something. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but no, it's you have to know the answer.
You have to know the answer
to the question for it to be a fair game. So, and on this one, I mean, what better story here though than the creation of the world? And we touched on it a little bit in the Voluspa, but this sort of expounds on it a little bit. It's visceral, it's graphic. They carved Ymir up and made all the things from his bones, his skull, his blood, his flesh, right? So, but, and I think we have also talked about how that's a common theme. A sort of primordial being embodying chaos, essentially, which I believe Ymir effectively is. We've commented that Ymir is genderless, but they are saying he in this case. But I don't think it's relevant. He's still symbolically embodying some kind of.
Yes, and there's actually a riddle about that coming up. So yeah, we'll get into that. Right,
exactly. So it's just. An ongoing theme of making order from chaos is essentially what it is. You take the great being of chaos, presumably would be the wrong word. I don't want to assume anything here, but if there was any greater mythology around Ymir that we've maybe somehow lost, it might have gone something like Ymir was tyrannical and not giving the world any peace. No one could hang out and do their thing, something like that. And then so Odin and Vili and Ve, or Odin and Hodor and
Lodi?
Yes, something like that. Gotta keep those facts straight, all those names. They go and kill Ymir. Big accomplishment. I think that's something we can emphasize based on comparison to other traditions. The Mesopotamian creation story being one that I'm currently most familiar with here, with Marduk and Tiamat. Really, that just they go and make order out of chaos. They make the world out of chaos. So that's the story of Ymir. Really, really short, really little tidbit of it, but good piece of information to know.
Definitely, and I'll just add, we mentioned this in the Voluspa, but I'll mention it again. So Ymir's name means scream, kind of that primal scream out of the void, and it's just kind of unrelenting chaos. And we'll actually see, we'll see some of that in a few riddles, that the chaos and the like where he comes from and all that kind of stuff. So
definitely, back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me the second if your wits serve you well, if you know it, riddle weaver. How did the moon come to be, the one that floats over the earth? Or what about the sun, giant?" Riddle weaver said, "Mundilfari is the name of the father of the moon. He was also the sun's father. They will float across the sky every day to help the humans tell the time and season."
So Mundilfari is interesting. They don't have a great translation of the name. It's sort of it's a weird one to put into English, but it sort of has this idea of the one moving according to particular time. So you can see why it would be difficult to like encapsulate it in one English word, but they basically give the name and then explain what it is. I mean, that's how we measure time still, is by how the sun and the moon move. And they help us tell times and seasons. And of course, that's important, especially back then when you were planting your crops and trying to figure out when to harvest them so that they didn't freeze and you starve during the winter. So it's a little more obscure than just, how does the sun and the moon move across the sky? It's, well, how did they get there? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and I mean, their explanation obviously isn't fantastic here. It's not, again, to use that word, sophisticated or anything like that, but they have an explanation, and I think that's the point. They have an explanation. Exactly,
and the explanation shows the value of it. How does it relate to them, and what's the purpose of it? Well, it tells them what time of day and year it is. So they don't need it for anything else, really. Like that's what they need it for. Is how does this work? Oh, this is what it does for us. Okay, we're good to go.
Exactly, and I mean, it's re-emphasizing the importance of the discovery of time, which really is more the discovery of the future as well. Mm-hmm. Like naming the things that help you tell the time. That's them organizing their world and really controlling it by understanding it as well as they do anyway. And so it's not like they can control time, but they can darn well predict it. And that's really the whole point. And it really, by mentioning this again, I think they're marking that milestone, which is for sure a good detail there. So, shall I move on?
Yes.
Back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me this third, if you want to be called wise, if you know it, riddle weaver. How did the day come to be, or the night which passes above, with its waxing and waning moon?" Riddle weaver said, "Delling is the name of the father of the day, and the night is Norvi's daughter. The waxing and waning of the moon was designed by the gods to help tell the time and season."
So again, we see this emphasis on time. And it's interesting to me because we still have that emphasis on time that, well, we have to do this now, or, oh, I can't go out right now, because later I'm going to be doing this, we still have that emphasis on time and how important it is. They obviously felt it was very important. So I find that quite interesting. The other thing I found interesting, because I didn't think of it this way before I looked into it. So Delling, the father of the day, translates to shining one or day spring. So Delling isn't necessarily a deity so much as that it's the dawn. So what gives birth to the day? Well, the dawn does, because it comes first. And I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. Just as Norvi, the father of the night, it's more like evening. And the father of day being, I think dagger is a way of pronouncing it. Dagr, yeah. And again, it's showing that they actually have a pretty sophisticated way of telling time. And the riddle is obviously meant to ask, okay, you've asked me about geography, I've asked you about the beginning of the world, but okay, what about time? That's sort of more, it's not a physical thing. Like you can't hold on to time at all, but we all acknowledge and act as if it is something that moves without our input. Like it moves no matter what we do. So it's interesting. It's kind of like it's a way of Odin sort of testing whether or not Riddle Weaver is wise enough to think abstractly and to see these things that really have no. It has a physical manifestation, but it doesn't have, or even that's not a better way. Is physical representations. You can see it moving things, but you can't actually see it, and that's, I think, what we're getting at is sort of this more abstract wisdom.
Definitely, and I like the meanings here that really do give it the tone of a riddle. Like riddles, do you think of them nowadays are very much kind of a trick. You spin an answer. It can only really be this one thing, but it's not for a concrete reason. It's for some abstract, roundabout way of describing something, and that's a very good way of being knowledgeable, is if you understand riddles, right? And this is a riddle type answer.
Sure.
What brings the date? The dawn. Great. And just more emphasis on time. Like that's important to them.
Definitely.
I don't have much more on this one. Well, actually, the point that I would like to touch on here really quickly, though, is that Odin numbered his questions.
Yes.
And so Vafthrudnir, I mean, he's maybe not necessarily caught off guard per se, but he wasn't as prepared as Odin was. And so Vafthrudnir, okay, here's some things. Okay, now I'm satisfied, whatever. Odin has numbered questions. If Vafthrudnir doesn't fulfill all the questions on the list, I'm sure Odin in the back of his mind is like, well, this guy wasn't worth my time. But
for sure.
if he can fulfill the questions in the list, yeah, maybe he's actually on the level where Odin could actually learn something. So
definitely.
That's a good one. So back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me this forth, if you want to be called wise, if you know it, Riddle Weaver. How did the winter come to be, or the warm summer? When did they first come about?" Riddle Weaver said, "Vinsfall is the name of the father of winter, and Svasuth, the father of summer."
So with this one, Vinsfall means wind cool, and whereas Svasuth is mild one. So it describes the seasons. And again, you're seeing just more questions about the seasons and time, and whether or not it's almost like he's trying to figure out if Riddle Weaver has a mastery over time and seasons and the understanding of what they mean. And I think it's there were questions about orienting yourself in the world earlier that Riddle Weaver asked. This is more like orienting yourself in I don't know. It's like orienting yourself in almost in life, like, or in society, I guess would be a better way of looking at it. Are you sophisticated enough to do these things at the right time?
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. It's a deeper level. It's no longer factual. It's do you understand these foundational concepts of the world that have formed the basis of our culture, something like that.
Exactly. Yes.
So and actually the only other point I wanted to make on that, other than the riddle like meanings for the names there, good ones. The emphasis on lineage, and so I mean they're talking about it's someone's father or daughter or whatnot, and it's just an emphasis on continuity and ancestry, and really also a degree of personification. Like you give these things names, but you also give them people to help them kind of understand that, and then they bring about the connection by describing it as a lineage. So maybe it's a way of relating it to their audience, something like that. So.
For sure.
Okay, I think we're good on that one then. Back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me this fifth, if you want to be called wise, if you know it, riddle weaver. Who was the oldest being, whether god or giant, who appeared in the oldest times?" Riddle weaver said, "Untold years ago, before the earth was made, Aurgelmir was born. His father was Thruthgilmir, and Thruthgilmir's father was Aurgelmir."
So what's interesting about this, I'm sort of going to go backwards on this one. Aurgelmir is generally understood to be Ymir as well. And that's why he's the father and the grandfather of the father of Thruthgilmir and then the grandfather of Aurgelmir. And the names are very interesting. So Ymir, as I mentioned before, is scream. Thruthgilmir is strength yeller. And I'm not quite sure what to make of that in terms of like the cosmology of it. 'Cause I'm assuming because it's Ymir that there's an understanding that these are like the first beings. And you've got that common thread of yelling, because Aurgelmir's name is Mountain Yeller or Bear Yeller. And I'm wondering if it kind of goes from scream just in general, that primordial, the first movement, and then you have strength yeller, so there's power there, and it's sort of, I guess, moving into creation. And then with Aurgelmir, you have Mountain Yeller and Bear Yeller, and I mean, even now, mountains are majestic things that you see off in the distance, or like when you're hiking. Like there's a majesty there that is powerful, and it's older than any of us, and will be here long after all of us. And it's not that different from bears in that, like, as far as animals go, bears are pretty, like, if you're out and you see a bear, like, your life is in danger. And there's a lot of power in the bear. And, I mean, especially to our ancestors, like, the cave bear was a serious threat, because you needed to cave a lot of the time to survive the elements. And if there's a cave bear there, and they were huge, like... And if you look, there is evidence of like bear worship, bear cults. So it's hard to emphasize, in this day and age, the importance of bears to our ancestors, because they killed us and were sort of magnificent at it because they're so big and hard to kill and defend yourself against. So I think you have sort of a hierarchy of creation and big things with these three.
Yeah. I like that you bring up bears. I didn't have any of this in the forefront of my mind on this. I was thinking about, but no, you're right. I can even just off the top of my head, I know the Finnic cultures and mythology, like the bear was huge for them, and
sure.
Mircea Eliade talks about examples of bears as well being like burials and things like that, and But that might also have something to do with like the hunting spirit, something like that. Those original cults. I would have to go back, reread history of religious ideas a little bit better. But the Finnish mythology, the bear was hugely central to their mythology. And again, this is another one of those things that I would have to go back and reread the details. And I'd love to for us to eventually get to some Finnish mythology one day. But I think we're looking at quite down the road for that if that's the case. No, and I like the progression as well. I mean, it really shows some understanding of how these things progress and go from the really abstract to the really concrete. And I mean, that's a sophistication of the question as well. So it's like testing, do you see the relationships between things as well? But then at the same time, it's also this oldness. Do you know these oldest beings? And again, it really goes into the idea of lineage again. And I mean, that's a common thread in many cultures as well. Even I mean, you can just point to the Jewish, like their long lists of lineages and whatnot. And I mean, they were only going for kind of one branch. I mean, if you're starting at Adam, for example, that goes kind of in a direct line with all of his descendants and things like that, and he's theoretically the only source there is,
for sure.
But you go down a little bit deeper and really they're just talking about one tribe or one branch or whatnot. And I mean, so here you're like one branch of being, so it's not so different.
No,
in this perspective, it's definitely saying, okay, so here's this oldest giant, here's this oldest being, and here's his descendants, and then there's going to be another one for the gods and another one for mankind. And so, I mean, they do kind of delineate those mythological tribes a little more fully.
For sure.
But at the end of the day, I mean, they do just essentially branch out into tribes themselves, the Jewish people. So it's
very similar. Absolutely.
Exactly. Smaller scale here, though. Maybe they didn't want to remember so many names,
probably not.
Something like that. But anyway, back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me this sixth, if you want to be called wise, if you know it, Riddle Weaver. How did Aurgelmir come to be? What was the origin of that first giant?" Riddle Weaver said, "Drops of poison fell from Elivagar. They gelled and formed the giant. All the families of us giants have our origin there. That's why we're bad through and through."
I like that. So this is the story of Ymir's, I guess, conception, his birth, his origin. As I mentioned, they're the same being. So Elivagar, translates to ice waves, and if you think about it, like cold, frozen water is deadly in seconds. It's not so. You already know that Ymir is deadly and chaotic. It's, and as well, like the cold water up north is dark. You don't see below the waves very deeply. So it's really this, like just a great representation of chaos and like death, like instant death that forms this giant. And which I believe is why they say they're all bad through and through, because they're formed from that instant chaotic death.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's an interesting way to be developed, and it really, for me, echoes sort of the concept of original sin, sort of not in the same context that it's sort of putting shame to people, but there's an understanding of there is some sort of concept of evil, and it permeates the world, and I mean, we see that in the Mesopotamian story as well. I mean, the world is created out of the blood of Kingu, part of it anyway. Mankind, I think specifically, is like formed from the blood of Kingu, and so I mean, he's this just monster sort of thing, and that's what men are made of. And I mean, here, you get the idea that the transitive property here men and women are created from trees, essentially, per the Voluspa. That comes from the world, so ergo, right? It's interesting. It's just sort of the idea that the potential for evil, the potential for chaos is there. So I mean, I am willing to go to the place where maybe they're emphasizing badness, evil, a little heavily here. Maybe it's a touch heavy-handed, but that would be speculation, honestly. So that could be something relatively central, that, you know, the concept of evil, everyone is at least capable of it. Or maybe it was less emphasized here and really they just meant chaos. Either one is conceivable to me.
I'd agree. And that's what I was just thinking, that it could just be that, you know, if you face chaos, that, like, there's a chance you're going to die. Like, it is out to get you. And that's sort of and that also translates into individuals that sometimes they are out to get you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, and what's interesting here, the gods might be the only ones that are innocent in this whole picture. So maybe there's some idea of idealization there, even though they definitely aren't perfect and aren't blameless. So
for sure,
you can kind of take that both ways in some sense. Back to the poem. Tell me this seventh if you want to be called wise, if you know it, riddle weaver. How did that giant, Ymir, have children, if he had no women to share his bed? Riddle weaver said, they say 2 giants, a man and a woman, grew under his armpits. One foot had a child with the other foot, and their son had 6 heads.
That's awesome. So it's a hermaphroditic representation, and the archetype of the hermaphrodite, it's always been kind of a chaotic symbol, because it's not ordered, it's not one or the other, it's both kind of mingled together, and you don't know what's going to come out of it. And as you see here, like, some weird stuff comes out of it, and it's showing actually it's interesting because, you know, man and woman come out of Ymir himself. And I think that goes back to our previous point about there being the capability of evil. These, you know, if Ymir was made of drops of poison and then he made us, obviously we're going to have some of that carried within us. And then you can see, like, one foot had a child with the other foot and their son had 6 heads. Like, it's just more representations of chaos. Like, it really... It shows that we were made, that, like, we came from chaos as well, I think is the point here, that, and what Odin is trying to get from Riddle Weaver.
Sure. No, yeah, I agree. It's definitely an interesting answer, that's for sure. Mm. I do like the idea that it's differentiation into man and woman. Like, they sort of feel the need to explain that, like, why is it necessary for there to be kind of the differentiation to the two things, if maybe there was this one being, something like that. And, you know, it's odd. It's interesting. They have a concept of there having to be one first being, and then other beings kind of come out of it. And, you know, because they could have said something to the effect of, here's the first man and here's the first woman kind of together, and the things go normally.
For sure.
But eventually they have some kind of conception that it all has to go back to one eventually. That was interesting to me. I'm not sure what to make of it, but...
No, it's kind of puzzling, to be honest, but I think that, yeah, just it's sort of, it is what it is.
The rest of the idea of Ymir sort of fits, and Ymir, I mean, in the other stories, I mean, Tiamat had the counterpart of Absu as well.
That's right.
And I mean, there were sort of things there. So I mean, there could be some other things to think about for the idea. There was this one single hermaphroditic, as you said, being, as opposed to one being that was the chaos side of sort of a balanced order equation.
For sure.
Right. So anyway, that's all I got for that one there. back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me this eighth, if you want to be called wise, if you know it, Riddle Weaver. What is your first memory, the earliest thing you remember? I suspect you're all-knowing, giant." Riddle Weaver said, "My very first memory is of Aurgelmir, untold years before the earth was formed. I remember the wise giant laid out in his coffin."
So we're getting an idea of the age of Riddle Weaver, obviously like prehistorical. And well, we've already seen the name Aurgelmir come up. So Riddle Weaver remembers seeing Aurgelmir dead in his coffin, and before the earth was formed. So Ymir was still around. So it's really like, it's prehistory. So to give it any like linear time frame is, I think we're not meant to. I think it's supposed to be, way before any of this was created and ordered or anything like that. So like outside of time. And yeah, that's sort of Odin is figuring out how old he is, so that like he's outside of time, so he might actually be all-knowing, as Odin is suspecting. I actually think that was a pretty genuine statement, that he might be knowing a lot, that Odin wants to know, but that he is in fact a worthy opponent.
Yeah, well, and I think the questions are ramping up. That's kind of the idea here. The questions ramp up more and more and more, and he's like, okay, so here's this one. If you answer this one, well, yeah, maybe you are all knowing. It's a good one. The biggest thing that I got out of this, though, and I like that you mentioned that this is sort of outside of time. I like that you mentioned that, because here, I think my reading of this anyway is some concept that there's the idea of generational limits to knowledge. And the reason I go there, so, the lineage was Aurgelmir to Vafthrudnir to Aurgelmir, right? And so Aurgelmir is the youngest of these old gods, right? Leading all the way back to Ymir. Whereas Vafthrudnir, he only sees Aurgelmir when he's dead, right? So it puts a generational boundary in it, and as much as it emphasizes the age of Vafthrudnir, which I agree with, it also emphasizes the fact that there are these people, these stories that he won't have even heard directly from someone who experienced it. And that is a big theory as to why we came up with myths and stories in the first place, because the average age of factual knowledge for a prehistoric, like a industrialized, none of those are the right words, a tribe that is pre-science, something like that, pre-writing, that's maybe better, is 2 generations. So effectively, they go back far enough to be able to hear the direct accounts from the people who actually experienced it. But it gets fuzzier and fuzzier as you go back. Like those people who are 2 generations old, your grandparents' generation, can't explain with as much clarity the things that they were told, right?
Definitely. So like if, your grandfather's telling you a story and you've got a question, well, like, why did they do that? He wouldn't necessarily know the answer, because this was how he heard the story from his grandfather, right? And so that the intricacies have been lost to time, but the sort of the major points of the story are still there, and that's what gets passed on.
It gets distilled into the things that matter, which are the archetypes, which are the lessons. It doesn't so much matter exactly who the person is. And I mean, that's another reason why, another theory why a lot of these gods have so many names, because in a lot of cases, they might be the amalgamation of either many different tribes, gods, or many different heroes or whatnot, and why they eventually converge on one in the case of societies that went full monotheism, right? So it's...
For sure. No, that's very interesting.
Yeah, no, I love this stanza.
That's a great stanza.
For just enunciating that even in some small way. I think it's directly getting at that idea. Like, I didn't hear about the things that Aurgelmir did from Bergelmir because Bergelmir was already dead when I was first, having memories, sort of thing, right? So I mean, it imposes a generational limit.
For sure. No, that's pretty awesome.
And they understood it. That's also pretty neat.
Yeah, that's really neat.
So I like that a lot. Definitely something that I think is useful for the understanding of how the archetypes in these myths and mythologies came to be and why they are so meaningful. I mean, we've had a couple of stanzas here of plot, but they've been meaningful
for sure.
And I mean that's what gets remembered. That's what gets remembered over time. So
absolutely.
Back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me this ninth if you want to be called wise, if you know it, Riddle Weaver. How did the wind come to be, the wind that blows over the sea? It's something that is seldom seen." Riddle Weaver said, "There is a giant eagle named Hrasvelg who sits at the sky's end. They say that it's from his wings the wind is blown."
Hrasvelg, I think he wins in this poem for the best name meaning, which is corpse swallower. That's a great name.
Good name.
Yeah. And I've talked a little bit about this before, but eagles, there's a lot of symbolism around death with them because, first of all, they're fantastic hunters. Second, they're also predators of opportunity, so they will steal another animal's kill, and they'll also scavenge. So they're not necessarily known as carrion birds like vultures, but they don't really have a problem with eating rotting animals. And so that's why I've mentioned this before, but if someone was a great warrior, then they were a great feeder of the eagles. When it would be one of their titles or kennings. So we have Hrasvelg here, who sits at the sky's end, and what I see here is sort of the boundaries of human ability or human experience. So we can't go to the sky's end. We can barely, especially this time, they couldn't actually go into the sky. So it was a place beyond. It was a place beyond where humans could go, and in fact, it suggests to me that it was kind of like death in that way, in that if you wanted to go there, the boundary you'd have to cross is death, because you've got this corpse swallower that's there. And so if you're trying to explain the wind, like, where does the wind come from? Like, we can explain it now with science through, sun heating up the sky or whatever, or I guess the land. But they didn't have that. So it's just, where does the wind start? Well, who knows? We can't get there. And it's beyond this boundary that's there. So it's a limitation to sort of the human condition, that we can't go there because it's beyond what our capability is.
I really like that. Probably the only thing I have to add is just, again, that eagle symbolism. Like, the association with death is, there's something to that, but he was also the adversary of the serpent, the
yes.
eagle, right? And I mean, it's very idealized, very idealistic. There's cultures that worshipped the eagle in particular. So the eagle is in a lot of ways a positive symbol, and so I mean an eagle being associated with the wind, even though corpse swallower, it's a positive trait regardless, a positive symbolization. Definitely. But you really covered that one, honestly. So I think might as well move on.
Let's move on.
Back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me this 10th. You must know the fate of all the gods, wise riddle weaver. How did Njord come to be among the Aesir? He has hundreds of temples and altars, but he was not born among the Aesir." Riddle Weaver said, "Wise Vanir created him in Vanaheim and gave him as a hostage to the Aesir. At Ragnarok, he will go back home to the wise Vanir."
So they've got Njord here, where it's also seen pronounced Njord, and he's the sea god, which is huge for the seafaring Germanic people. So Vikings and that kind of thing. Like they obviously got a lot of their food from the ocean, then traded and traveled other places. I mean, their boats were the best in the world at the time. So it's he's a very important god, and that's why there would be so many temples and altars to him, because of course you're going to make an offering to him before a voyage, or for a loved one on a voyage, or just because you're feeding your family with fish. Like, it's that simple. And it's a reference to the first war between the Vanir and the Aesir, and trading hostages to sort of to create peace, because you're not going to kill the other one if you've got your family there. And then Njord has sort of his own interesting story with Skadi that we'll probably get into at another later date. But it's a great and interesting story. And it's an interesting riddle, because for Odin, it's kind of a personal question, because Odin was there at that war, and it's like, well, did you hear about this great war where these two mighty tribes combined their they merged, basically. So it's an important question, but you'd almost think it's a little unfair of Odin to ask, because it's like a personal thing, like what happened. But I do think it was a big enough deal at the time that it was probably like well known that these two tribes, because of their size and power, had merged.
Yeah, no, the story of Njord and the idea of Njord is huge. So I can't mention Njord without first mentioning Nerthus, who was a precursor to Njord by all understandings that we have. Nerthus was effectively a counterpart to Njord, and she was an earth goddess. So he is a god of the sea. She is an earth goddess, more like a mother goddess, like a Mother Earth type, Mother Earth. Which was a very, very old idea associated mostly with fertility cults. The idea that seed goes into the ground, and the earth is the mother, and then great things come out of it. Good stuff. And she would have a procession, carried by slaves, and it would go around the countryside and everything like that, but no one could see her. It was covered. No one could see Nerthus, and the only person who could look at her was a single slave, who I believe it went that the slave washed Nerthus, something like that, at a spring or whatnot. I'm a little fuzzy on those details there, but the point was, after that, slave gets drowned. So, no one can look upon Nerthus and live. So something to do with the sacred, I believe, right there.
Definitely.
I would like to, it would be awesome if we could get into some of those stories that are really only attested in those old, really the oldest sources we have, essentially. For sure. Right? So, but back to Njord. So, unclear how that transition happened, but it's mostly understood or theorized or whatnot that Njord was sort of a transition from Nerthus, sort of by the time of the Viking Age, the Old Norse Age. By that time, Nerthus had become Njord somehow. And so, I mean, that's first of all, that's another source of altars and things like that. Just so many things dedicated to Njord. But also, he is firmly a nature god, a natural god, right? So, my understanding of him joining the Aesir, my understanding of that is effectively how describing, on a symbolic level, how culture became a master of the sea and gained mastery over it. And again, you mentioned, those ships and being seafaring. I think the metaphor of Njord joining the Aesir is the ability for people to have mastery over the sea and being able to cross it without nearly as much danger as would have been before.
For sure.
So, and then, returning home after Ragnarok, when culture gets wiped out, there's no more boats, probably.
No. Actually, that interpretation also works for Frey. Sort of mastery over nature, over crops and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's really like heading in the right direction, for sure.
Yeah, it's being completely honest here. It's something I hadn't really thought too much about until this stanza maybe put that more in perspective for me. So
for sure,
yeah, I like that one a lot. We could go really deep into Njord, but honestly, there's still a lot to cover.
Yeah, there's still a lot to cover.
Back to the poem. Odin said, "Tell me this 11th. Where is the hall where men fight each other every day?" Riddleweaver said, "All the Einherjar in Odin's hall fight each other every day. They kill each other, but then ride back from battle and sit in the evening as friends."
So this, of course, is they're talking about Valhalla, that Odin's hall, where when Odin chooses, or he has second choice of all the slain, and they go to Valhalla, and there's a certain number of them to fight on, at Ragnarok. And I was thinking a lot about this, and first of all, it sounds like a pretty good life, where you get to fight and then die and then come back and party and then wake up the next day and fight. That's pretty good. They're fighting upheaval and chaos in Ragnarok, and I look at them kind of as they're kind of heroes that we can look at. So when our societies are going through change and upheaval, and we're sort of trying to reorient ourselves in the world and look at the values that sort of put the society on firm ground. So, for example, like free speech or any of the sort of classical liberal ideas that built our society. I look at the Einherjar as the people that we can look at and use as examples of why these values are worth moving forward with. So for an example of like classical liberal societies, John Locke might be an Einherjar, where you can be like, well, actually, like, someone's saying, oh, we should maybe do things this way, and you can look and say, well, this is what John Locke said, and this is the results of what he said. So you're kind of using this person who's a dead fighter for his ideology as you're kind of resurrecting him to fight again for what he's against, chaos and upheaval and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of what when I was thinking about the Einherjar, that was sort of what I was thinking for like societies and cultures and ideas, that they're the heroes that you can look back, the honored dead that you can look back to and say, you know what, they did a good job, so maybe they're worth looking at and emulating.
Wow, I really like that one. I really like that reading of it, actually. Yeah, I mean, from a literal perspective, Odin was sort of gathering enough fighters, warriors, whatever, to be able to survive Ragnarok. I mean, that's the nominal goal of him gathering the Einherjar, right? But I had never thought of it like that, where it's like a concept of, these are the dead, but they did something valuable and we can still learn from them. That's fantastic. It really ties into just the idea of resurrecting old ideas and applying them, essentially.
Exactly,
right?
Sort of that, resurrecting the father, going into the underworld to get the father so that you can rejuvenate the society.
I really like that idea is in the same vein. I hadn't thought about it that way, actually. Yeah, that's great. Very profound.
We've had a few of those today.
Oh, geez, yeah, I know, huh? For me, I read this one a little bit in. This is I think you said this is a pretty great life, and why I think it's great is because these people, these men, they get to just go and test out whatever idea comes into their head, and they get to do it over and over without consequence. I'm not sure that's exactly the meaning here, but it's some kind of idealized setting where it's like, yeah, you can go and test it out, and you can go, try and kill this guy this way or defend that way, honing their skills. And really that speaks to the idea that it's something central to even just men in particular. It's hard to really get around that it's something that it's just something that it's in our nature to go and test each other out and to climb that dominance hierarchy and to push your friends. That's why I think it's they're friends afterwards, that camaraderie afterwards.
Absolutely. Just before we move on, I think the only thing that's missing from this life would be a little bit of Valkyrie loving.
Yeah.
But anyway,
can't argue with that. No, but yeah, it's an idea of testing and fighting for competence. And
for sure,
the example that comes to my mind on this was that traditional martial arts schools, essentially, you could have a debate as much as you want about which one is theoretically going to win. Is my karate going to beat your aikido, something like that?
For sure.
And then, the Gracie family from Brazil came to the United States and they put together the Ultimate Fighting Championship, commonly known as UFC. And the idea was, let's just take all the martial arts together and see which one comes out on top. And the winner in that case turned out to be jiu-jitsu, and jiu-jitsu ends up, which was that was the whole point. That was the Gracie family's thing. And the whole point of that now is that you basically can't be an MMA fighter without some kind of grappling art, which jiu-jitsu, for those of you who don't know, is very much just essentially a wrestling and grappling.
Definitely. And a high level of it if you're going to go far in MMA, you have to have a high level of it.
High level.
So, yeah.
And really the point that I tease out of that is that they were able to test it out. They were able to they were actually able to give it a try. And this is just the ultimate example of that. You can try it until you die, and then you get to come back the next day and do it again.
Yeah.
Good one, huh? So back to the poem. Tell me this 12th. You must know the fate of all the gods, wise riddle weaver. Tell me the truth about the secrets of the giants and the gods, you wise giant. Yeah, that was the right turn of phrase. Sorry. Riddle weaver said, I can tell you the truth about the secrets of the giants and all the gods, for I have visited them all at home. I've been to 9 realms beneath hell, to realms where the dead travel after hell.
That's cool that they mention the realms where the dead travel after hell, like that. I like it just from it's a cool mythological stanza, and it's another. I think it's a check. Odin again is checking on the Riddle Weaver's wisdom, just thinking checking where it is. This is prophecy because it hasn't happened yet. As you were mentioning before, it's, they've talked about that history, now they're talking about future things that have yet to happen. And he's searching again for answers and sort of what's going to happen at Ragnarok and what is the fate going to be. And that's sort of the prime motivation of Odin is, how is Ragnarok going to shake? How's it going to shake out? Because it's going to be the death of him and his god and his compatriots. So it's of prime importance, and I can see why he would work up to this question, which I think is actually the last of the numbered ones. And it's sort of for Odin, it's the most important one. So he was testing him all along to see, will he be able to tell me what I really want to know?
Yeah, and what's interesting about this to me is I feel like all the rest of the questions that come after this seems a little unfair. Vafthrudnir only asked 3 questions, 4 questions, something like that, right? Odin's been asking a lot of questions. But this answer, so-called here, this stanza 43, I don't think it was really an answer. I think this is Vafthrudnir saying, bring it.
Yeah.
This is him saying, I can answer your questions. I can answer more, deeper questions. Let's go. But you're exactly right, is that Odin wants to know things about the future. I mean, it's really an idea that he knows all there is to know about the present and the past. He wants to know about the future. And really, people keep telling him bad things People keep telling him bad things, and realistically, that's true. If you go and say, what is my future? What is my future like? The answer is bad.
Yeah.
The answer is it's gonna be bad. You're gonna die. But maybe there are some things you can do so that death is a little more bearable, so that you might be able to actually leave something behind.
That's worthwhile.
Exactly, and really, I think those are the answers that Odin is looking for. I think he's by now come to terms with the idea that he's going to die, but what can there be afterwards, right? So, if that's and I like that you talked about the dead travel after hell. That also to me seems like there's some kind of idea that death is also not the end, and it's not static either.
No.
It's not just you go to one place. I think there's an aspect of our nature that's something like you don't want to end up somewhere static where there's no challenge.
Definitely.
In this case, there's still somewhere to go afterwards. Some further journey to be made. Some way you can accomplish something after death. That's just. I'm not saying that's true, but their idea of that, implying that the dead are traveling to other realms after hell, that's pretty cool to me.
Definitely. No, it's interesting that, especially like in the West right now, the idea of heaven, it's not much is known about heaven really. It's especially as far as like the myths go, other than it's sort of a place of paradise, and which sounds sort of static, and the difference in their understanding of what happens after death is quite stark. It's sort of the opposite, that no, things keep happening.
Exactly. It's optimistic, I think.
It is.
Compared to heaven or hell with two L's.
For sure.
So that's just my opinion. All right, back to the poem. I have traveled so much. I have tried much. And I have often tested the mighty. Will any humans remain alive after Fimbulvetter has passed over Midgard? Riddleweaver said, life and pulsing with life will survive. They will hide in Hodnimir's forest. They will eat the morning dew and renew the human race.
This one's cool too. So, Fimbulvetter is basically this, Ragnarok is supposed to be preceded by 3 winters without summer. And so things freeze. And there has been some, I guess, curiosity around, did that mean like an ice age? Something that they went through. And as we've seen in Voluspa, 2 humans survive by hiding in Hodmir's forest. There's, or I think I said Hodmimir. There's thinking that might be just another name for Yggdrasil. And life and pulsating with life, that's life and life Rathsir, which we also see in Voluspa. So it's the stories have continuation. They continuity. They're all working with the same set of stories. There's a few things that I really find interesting. So during Ragnarok, Yggdrasil catches on fire, but it's not known whether or not it burns down. And my reading is that it doesn't burn down, that even though it catches on fire, it survives. And I think that's really true about life and facing challenges in life, because when something like Ragnarok happens in your own life where everything that came before it is now wiped away and no longer viable, you don't necessarily die. And the essence of who you are doesn't necessarily disappear. It just changes and grows. And so you are still you. You're just sort of a grown-up, better version of you after, the catastrophe of great change in your own sort of personal Ragnarok. And what I like what I really like about the idea of that they will eat the morning dew and renew the human race. As we said before, the morning dew comes from, what is it, Hrimfaxi? The slobber that comes from this horse's mouth that pulls the moon. And it comes from the frost mane so it sort of essences ice, which for Northern European peoples, it's chaotic. And things are created from it and destroyed by it. But with morning dew, it's like the most manageable portions of chaos that you can imagine. And it's actually like quite nice. Like when you see morning dew and feel it on your feet, like it's nice, you know? But it shows me that there has to be that kind of harnessed chaos to grow and renew things. And once you've like gone through the change and changed, you become better at eating chaos, at having one foot in chaos and one foot in order. And morning dew is kind of that. I think here symbolizes that, because it's manageable, but it's still chaos, and you're still going to live and thrive on it.
Yeah. I definitely didn't go into that one at that level there, so I really don't have much to add. I mean, no, that's yeah, the idea of starting over from that place, but it's also like, well, the idea that they're eating the morning dew, it's like they're coming out of the night, right? They're coming out of the night into the day, something like that. Like the concept of the morning, that's very rejuvenating.
For sure.
That's associated with this renewal, right? And the dawn, and then so I mean, yeah, that all fits. I don't have anything more to add. That's a great point on this. I mean, it's really just from Odin's perspective, it's like it's confirming that life is going to go on. Although, a note here, I think the idea of prophecy here, it's like, here is what could be if you do your duty.
For sure.
I don't know if I really have much in the way to back that up as far as like anyone saying that explicitly, but it's more like, if you put all your effort into leaving things in the best possible state that you can, here is a way that it could turn out positively. Like if Odin did nothing and didn't prepare for Ragnarok at all, if culture had no defense against chaos, the outside world, whatnot, it would just go.
Oh, for sure.
Well, we've seen
swept
that.
Away.
We've seen that. That's flood myths. That's the levees breaking over New Orleans. That's so many things, right? And so I think the message here is something. I think it's something like, here are some good things, Odin, but you still have to do your part. Here, you might be able to leave a good legacy, but you still have to put your effort in to have a good life.
Definitely.
This might be a little harsh, but I think that's sort of, it's a counter argument against the idea of a deathbed confession, where you can't erase bad life choices throughout your life by just sort of saying that, oh, now in the end I've got my head in the right place, something like that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. There always has to be. Well, we've said it before on this podcast, and Jordan Peterson says it all the time, that you don't get away with anything. So there's always an accounting, and so if Odin isn't accountable, this is not possible. He has to be accountable here, and he is being accountable. That's why he's gone to test himself against the Riddle Weaver and to find out like what's going to happen, what is the fate of the gods and the giants and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, he's exactly. It's a nuance, and really, I'll fully admit that you could say that I'm reading into this by having that play on things here, but I don't see how it makes any sense if this is just the kind of thing of Odin is getting his answer and then he gets to skate on for the rest of life. That maybe what I'm going off of is that would be directly counter to his nature that he has shown us so far and will show us in future stories.
For sure.
So if you'll give me that one, I think this makes sense.
I do too.
Back to the poem then. Odin said, I have traveled so much, I have tried much, and I have often tested the mighty. How will there still be a son when the wolf has eaten the one that now flies in heaven? Riddle Weaver said, the son will have a daughter before Fenrir eats her, and that young son will travel on her mother's path when the gods have all died.
So this one is interesting because it kind of describes the mythology behind sort of the Northern European celebration of Yule. So, what is it? Not the equinox, solstice. Why, geez. So during that time, the solstice, December 21st, about some of the longest days of the year, the sun goes away, and then 12 days later you start seeing more and more of the sun. It's sort of this idea of renewal that, and there's mythology surrounding Yule. That's why they burn the Yule log and try and have it going for as long as they possibly can. And it's, very auspicious if you make it the 12 days and that kind of thing. So, as we were saying before, that they put a lot of importance on the sun, we're actually seeing how much importance they put on here because, bad things happen, but there is that expectation of renewal and things carrying on afterwards. And it's very hopeful, even though Fenrir is eating the sun. It's very hopeful because there is something that will happen after it that will, the sun will come back.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It is that hope. It continues this theme of renewal, and really they observed that is sort of the whole point,
Definitely.
Right? And in a lot of cases, so you got to understand a little bit that at least in the lower latitudes of Scandinavia, the sun doesn't go away. It's not like it completely disappears for 6 months. You go way up north, though, above the Arctic Circle, and certainly in the area where the Sami lived.
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it does.
Gone. So there's a distinction there. For most of the people that are developing these ideas, especially earlier on, they would have understood that the sun darn well comes back. And as they journeyed up and up and up, north, further north, that would have continued on. It just would have been a little edgier.
For sure.
As they kept going, but they would have observed that, eventually it does come back. But here, even on another level, no idea if they were getting at this at all whatsoever, but it describes the idea of a star going supernova and then forming a new one out of its dead star ashes, right? Like that's...
Hadn't even thought of that.
Like, it's completely possible that wasn't even close to what they were going for. But for me, it's so clear that it's some kind of understanding that, the sun goes away, it's going to come back again. It might have been more mundane than that, but...
But it might just be that it works on all these different levels, because a lot of their stuff does work on these different levels. And
yeah, exactly. I think you're right about that. Works on a lot of levels. Okay, back to the poem. Odin said, I have traveled so much, I have tried much, and I have often tested the mighty. Who are those young women who fly above the sea, who travel in the air with their craft? Riddle Weaver said, there are 3 rivers that fall over those young women of Mogthrasir. Their only happiness is in Midgard, though they were born among giants.
So this one's a little puzzling because there aren't any other mentions of these young women, and Mogthrasir is only mentioned here. There's no other attestations. So I looked into it a bit, and Larrington makes some good notes about it. Just Vafthrudnismal means striver for sons. And I was trying to think, what... First of all, the who travel in the air with their craft. That is puzzling to me. I mean, I don't want to say ancient aliens. What's that mean? But, But, so that's weird. But the only thing I could kind of get from this is that maybe, and this is just me, thinking, so I could be totally wrong, that it's something to do with fertility in the new world. And I've got written down that maybe it means something like you can depend on the human desire to breed. And as I said, they're giants, so they're the unknown. But there's sort of that, as I was talking about before, like the chaos and the unknown isn't necessarily bad. It just means it can be used for growth. So I'm just wondering if there's something to do with fertility there. That's sort of the only, and I'm probably totally wrong, but that's sort of where the angle I took to try and explain this.
Yeah, and really, your guess is as good as mine. The only thing I could think of for Three Rivers was there's a parallel to the Three Wells, which is something to do with fate, and certainly it's something to do with boundaries, and water is something to do with fate and the concept of fate and it just going on and on and on, and there's something there, but it really might be just unfortunately lost. And I mean that's really the tragedy. The tragedy of that we have lost so much of many cultures that were more oral in tradition and only started getting written down after they were effectively replaced by Christianity or some other literate tradition. But we also have to be grateful for what is there. So we might not be able to interpret this one, but the rest of this poem has been very good, I think.
For sure.
And we can be grateful for that. So with that, back to the poem. Odin said, I have traveled so much. I have tried much. I have often tested the mighty. Which gods will inherit Asgard when the fires of Ragnarok go out? Riddle Weaver said, Vidar and Valley will inhabit Asgard when the fires of Ragnarok go out. Modi and Magni will inherit Mjolnir after Thor is killed.
So this one refers to some of my favorite gods and stories in Norse mythology. And I know I've mentioned at least Vidar before, but I'll give some translations for the names because they actually sort of help with the picture that's being painted here. So Vidar means a wide ruler. Valley means arguing one. And again, that's another one of those names that it's kind of a rough one to translate it because so Valley is the god that is born after one night to go and kill Hod, who has killed Baldr. It's out of vengeance. And so arguing one isn't... The meaning of the word is sort of like the one who's going to stand in the way of people that you're not going to be able to push them around at all. And it's sort of just obstacle and opposition is sort of what it comes out as. So they survive Ragnarok. And then Mothi and Magni are the sons of Thor. Mothi means brave and Magni means great. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Mjolnir is a crusher or grinder, which is a cool name for a hammer. So these are the ones that survive. They don't mention Baldr, but Baldr also survives. And we mentioned it a little earlier about how sort of cultures have ideals and virtues that are embodied by gods, and most of the time it's one virtue for a god or a few, and then it sort of progresses into one. And Baldr's sort of that like catch-all god of he's the greatest of all things and the brightest and all that kind of stuff. But you have a lot of qualities in these gods that you would want in a new world, but also I think you would find that you manifest in yourself after a big change. So, Vithar being the wide ruler, well, once you've changed, you've now mastered, sort of a wide swath of human experience. Now there's lots of human experiences to master, but once you've mastered a part of it, like that's yours. You also become better at standing up for yourself, no matter what. Like whatever challenge you've faced, once you've overcome it, you now stand up to it. And then you're also brave and great and kind of wield the hammer that crushes things. Like the same problems that you faced before that seemed so hard, they're not going to be that hard anymore because you've mastered it and you've overcome it and gone through to the other side. So that's sort of what I took for the archetypal meaning of it.
Yeah, no, but like that's why Ragnarok as a metaphor for that psychological experience is so fantastic, because what comes out of it just makes so much sense. And I mean, no, you covered it really. Like what comes out afterwards, if you survive is going to be positive. So no, that's fantastic. And I mean, on a practical level, it means, the next generation is going to inherit as well. I mean, just on a practical level, that's what that means. And I mean, taken literally, that's leave a legacy, leave children that are capable and
yes,
able to exist on their own in the world, to be that hero, to be able to live that hero myth. Right?
Absolutely.
That is another one of those takeaways there. So, and I think that this can't be anything but comforting in some sense. The idea that once you're gone, if you leave children that are going to carry out your legacy, not to be selfish or anything, but they're going to carry on.
Absolutely.
There's something comforting there, I think. So
definitely.
Back to the poem. I have traveled so much. I have tried much, and I have often tested the mighty. How will Odin lose his life at Ragnarok? Riddleweaver said, a wolf will swallow Odin, but Vidar will avenge him. He'll cut open the wolf's cold jaws, kill the killer of his father.
So we've talked a lot about this particular thing. I think it was episode 3. So Valispa part 3, if you want to, we could go really in depth into it. We probably spent half an hour on it. I don't know. It's pretty awesome.
On the few stanzas there, exactly.
Yeah. So this is just talking about Fenrir killing Odin and then Vidar avenging him. Vidar is the silent god and spends his time preparing a shoe made out of scrap leather from shoemakers to be able to kill Fenrir. And he's killing Fenrir sort of, one, to avenge his father, and to fight back against the chaos that is unfolding during Ragnarok. And it's kind of society's way of fighting back and being Vidar. He's very strong. He's second in strength only to Thor, so he's quite the warrior in his own right. And I think what we're seeing here, and I'm starting to think that Odin actually didn't know these things, and this is where he learns it. So it'd be quite something to learn, like, you're going to be eaten by this wolf, but your son is going to avenge you. So
yeah. I mean, this is really it's the ultimate question. How will I die? And really, I mean, I think how is maybe not a word that encompasses everything he wants to know. I think there's an aspect of why. There's an aspect of what's going to get me there. What's the whole situation? What is my fate? I mean, the concept of fate and doom is another word that literally was used to kind of describe this. Like, the ultimate situation of your demise, but also your legacy. It's a big word, a huge word. Everyone asks that question, right?
Oh, for sure.
And then where do you go from there? The answer is not going to be you're never going to die. Yeah, there might be something unpleasant in your future, but that doesn't make the rest of life not worth living.
No, exactly. There are many things in life that sort of make the burden of living worth it.
Exactly. So, asking this question, it's dark, it's heavy, it's something every person must reconcile themselves with, because it's not just how am I going to die? It's just like what's going to happen afterwards. Like what is the ultimate goal there? He's not really focusing on the afterlife necessarily, but he is focusing on
what will happen after he's gone from this. He's not asking like, oh, am I going to go to hell with one L or the realms beyond? He's asking what's happening to my people after.
That's what he cares about.
That's what he cares about.
He cares that his tribe, his people will live on. And there's something there where it's like the example is just to strive to build something that's going to last.
Yeah, to aim for the highest good and hopefully bring others along with you so that they can carry it on like Vidar here.
Absolutely. Shall I move on?
Yes.
Last one?
Yeah, and it's a doozy.
We're finishing it off here, so this is stanzas 54 through 56. Odin said, back to the poem, I have traveled so much, I have tried much, and I have often tested the mighty. What did Odin whisper in Baldr's ear before he placed him on the pyre? Riddleweaver said, no one knows what you said in those ancient days in your son's ear. I have spoken my aged wisdom. I have told you of Ragnarok. I have spoken with a doomed mouth. Now I know that I wagered my head against Odin's in wisdom. But you, Odin, are forever the wisest of all.
So, what could a father possibly say to his son at his funeral? Like that's heavy. I know that most often it's thought that Odin talked to or said to Baldr something along the lines of that you'll be resurrected after Ragnarok, and I'm inclined to believe that, but I do think there was more to it than that. That maybe a warning or a warning that this is going to be like terrible. What you're going to go through is terrible. What we're all going to go through is terrible. But on the other end, we're going to be better off for it. And that to me is the message. And there's no record of what he said in other lore or poems or anything like that. So it's completely up to interpretation and speculation. But for me, when I see that, I see sort of that fatherly warning of this is going to be the hardest thing you ever do in your life and death, but you're going to come out of it on the other side and things will be much better.
Yeah. The fact that this is, it's open to interpretation because it's a mystery, and that's really the point here. And anything that either of us is saying as far as an answer, it's not an answer. It's best guess at what might make sense here. And there are so many things. And I like your answer has to do with the symbolic meaning of Baldr as sort of an initiation type of ordeal being the right word here, where the death is really like, this is the hardest thing you have to do. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the coming of age rituals, you know, the world over. Talked a little bit about it, and there's something there about the life, death, rebirth god,
for sure,
having something to do with that cycle. But it's really just, I think this is the biggest mystery we have in this lore, in these myths and stories and legends. And this mystery is almost something like, I think it would be brushing it aside to say that it's just about grief, or it's just about this single moment from a single perspective. I think it's more than that. I think it's something like, what is there to say in this darkest moment? What makes sense to say in this darkest moment? And again, I'll say it again. Like, I don't think it's only to do with grief, because I think that's a natural perspective there, but it's something to do with the promise of rebirth, the promise that if you can make it through, it will be better, like you said. I personally like the idea that maybe it's something like Odin promises to make it worth it.
Yes, I like that.
But even then, of course, that's only speculation. But it would make sense with Odin's character. Like, the darkest thing in his life so far, I think that's safe to say, he's not going to make that in vain. And maybe that's something like, no matter what the darkest things you experience, you know, you lose people. Maybe the message there is that you need to make it worth it. The sacrifices that they made have to not be in vain as well. Maybe it's something like Odin is taking on the responsibility for the sacrifice that his son is making. There's something to that, and something that fits in with the idea of sacrifice in general.
For sure, I definitely agree with that. I mean, the idea of a father sacrificing his son, I mean, we see that in other cultures as well, like Christianity, for example. That's a big one. But other ones too, where the son dies, sort of as a redemptive measure for the people. And yeah, there's something there. There's definitely something there.
Honestly, we could go on about this
for sure,
for a very long time. Suffice to say, though, this is the deepest. Well, I mean, I don't know if you can see in the video or hear in the audio here. I mean, this is some raw stuff. Like, it just contemplating what this actually means. Like, seriously thinking about what this means, it puts you in a dark place. But you gotta realize that Baldr will return. There's that hope at the end there. That promise that life will be renewed and it will be better. So no matter what the darkness there, if you aim for the highest good, what comes after will be better. I don't think that's a given.
No, I don't think it's a given. Unfortunately,
but I do think it's worth aiming for.
For sure.
Period.
Absolutely, it's worth aiming for.
So, just to tie this back in with the narrative here, And there's a there's a lot to that as well. Vafthrudnir recognizes Odin, and I mean, okay, maybe Odin has been deceptive this entire time. In a lot of ways, I don't know what to make of that per se. I mean, it's not necessarily like it's good to live deceptively, and Odin really plays that out in further. We'll be doing more episodes of the Havamal that will play that out.
For sure.
But at the end of the day, he's doing what is necessary to survive.
Absolutely. And the last line that Rudel Weaver speaks, but you, Odin, are forever the wisest of all. I think that's important to recognize that he's the wisest of all because he's always thirsting for more wisdom and more knowledge, and he's willing to do whatever it takes, including deceive people to get it. And that, I think, is why, like, I'm not saying that if you're not a god, maybe deception isn't the best way to go, but, you know, Odin is a god, so he can play a little fast and loose with the rules. But I think that's what makes him the wisest of all. You know, Socrates said, you know, that he was considered super wise because the only thing I know is that I know nothing. And it's sort of that humility and that hunger for knowledge that Odin shares, that he always knows there's more that he can learn.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe the flip side. So for us, absolutely, there is always something that you can learn. Always. Flip side to that, though, it might be something like there is a limit. It's unlimited the things you can learn, but I think there are some things that are just unknowable.
Absolutely.
And I think that's humbling in a very good way. That's something like there are mysteries of the world that you cannot understand fully. And I don't think that we ever will. I think that's the lesson here. The understanding that you can try to know everything, but at the end of the day, that might be futile. Like there is some sort of limit where really only the gods know, only the god of wisdom, of knowledge.
Exactly. Only the gods know, and the human burden is that we can taste that, but we can never have it because we're too firmly planted in the ground with sort of the normal animal stuff we have to do, like eating and sleeping and all that kind of stuff. Like that's the unfortunate middle area that we exist in.
The middle world.
The middle world.
But Vafthrudnir takes his medicine. He accepts his fate, and I think the end lesson here is something like, well, first of all, following through on your oaths, because I mean that's one you could welch on really definitely. Easily. Like, well, you're in my hall. No, off with my head today. Get out of here. But no. He would lose his honor, and I mean that's more important. He made a wager, but he wagered everything he was. Like there's something there. There's something to that. There's something
definitely.
You have to, at the end of the day, believe in yourself 100%. Not to sound like believe in yourself.
Yeah.
But no. Get yourself to a place of competency, of wisdom, of knowledge where you can bank on yourself 100%. And you know what? If you die, you die.
And it's a worthy death. Like he gave his all, and there's no dishonor there at all. Like no, it's
again, literally or metaphorically.
Literally or metaphorically, both. He's an honorable giant who gave his all and played the game and followed through it. Yeah,
exactly. So. He played the game to its conclusion. He lost, but he staked everything on it. If this is unclear whatsoever, we'd love to engage with you. But I think this wraps it up. Fantastic poem.
Yeah,
describes the competition of wisdom and knowledge, which maybe we don't necessarily value as highly as we should in today's society, and goes through some fantastic lore, which we don't know. many of these details are only here in this one poem.
Yeah.
And the deepest mystery of the poetic Edda, of the Germanic stories, myths, and legends that we have. Yeah, something there, huh?
Yeah.
So, and with that, and then we're over the 3-hour mark now. That was,
Oh, wow.
that went by. I think we're going to close here. Thank you all for listening. And we'll just finish off with our usual credits. So first of all, the copy of the Poetic Edda that we are reading is the Poetic Edda by Jackson Crawford. So thank you to Hammond to Hackett Publishing for letting us use the translation for this project. And we'll post a link to the book and to Jackson Crawford's YouTube channel, which we mentioned earlier. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the work of Dr. Jordan Peterson, who absolutely inspired this podcast, especially his biblical series, his series of biblical lectures available on YouTube. And we'll post a link to his YouTube channel as well as his website with a list of recommended books that go into a little more detail on some of the ideas that we are exploring.
For sure. Yeah, we definitely were reading through that list and using what we learned there to interpret these what we're reading here. So
exactly. And we are now finally on social media. So we have 3 Twitter accounts, one for the podcast in general, and that should be just at Northern Myths. And then we each have our own individual Twitter account. So that I'm Northern Myths Luke, and Dan is
Northern Myths Dan.
Yep. So we'll have those down below if you'd like to connect with us, and we're also on Facebook. Just search up Northern Myths Podcast. I think we're going for / Northern Myths on that one as well if we can. So and I think we're going to be on Instagram as well.
That's right.
I think that's the main ones that we're going for here, right?
Yep. No, that's about it, yeah.
So we'll post all the details. Please connect with us. Please comment on the videos or leave a review on wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd love to connect with you, continue the conversation.
For sure. As we like to say, we are not experts in this at all. None of what we're saying is hard and fast. This is what it is. We're just exploring it because it's what we like to do. And if you've got any comments, questions, or corrections, please let us know because, we're here to learn.
Absolutely. Please tell us when we're wrong.
Definitely. Yeah.
So with that, thank you very much for tuning in, for listening or watching. And we like to leave you with a paraphrasing of an idea from Carl Jung, the idea of knowing what myths you're living. So we encourage you all to find out what myth you're leaving. Thank you very much.